Chapter 335. Yang Chendong expressed his attitude. Although he was still angry and dissatisfied, he could only suppress it. He turned his head and snorted to express his dissatisfaction. Mr. Sun, on the other hand, kept bowing to Yang Chendong and thanking him. Then he turned around and led them downstairs in person. On the second floor of Xinglong Restaurant, 6 or 7 strong men were standing there and talking about something. From a distance, they seemed to be surrounding one of them and saying some flattering words. In Yang Chendong's life, this kind of thing couldn't be more insignificant. He didn't even want to take another look at it. However, there were many things in the world that had nothing to do with you even if you didn't want to. There were always some people who came to find you and could not be refused. Just like now, Yang Chendong and Mrs. Xue had walked past the corner of the second floor and went straight down to the first floor under the guidance of Mr. Sunday. Behind them, Hu Yan and Mrs. Xue followed. However, they seemed to be saying that their husband was lying. There was no such thing as White Lady and Su Xian here. When they talked about this, they couldn't help but chuckle. Just then, a gust of wind blew over and blew on Hu Yan's white veil. At a certain moment, the national beauty under the white veil was exposed. It happened to be seen clearly by a man in the crowd. It was not completely clear. He only knew that the woman was very beautiful and had very good skin. But this was enough. For many men, the more vague some things were, the more they could arouse their curiosity. If they could see through it at a glance, it would lose its original meaning. It was this glimpse that caused the man's heart to skip a beat. Then his body actually reacted in a primitive way. Perhaps he was used to such things, so he instinctively took a few hurried steps, passed through the crowd, and went straight to where Hu Yan and Mrs. Xue were. His reaction was not slow. Beta Persei, who was responsible for guarding Hu Yan and Mrs. Xue, instinctively reacted faster. When he felt a gust of wind, he had already stepped between the man who was about to do something. Scram! Suddenly, a tower-like man appeared in front of him. His figure was also very tall and sturdy, and he said this in an unfriendly manner. Then he threw a punch over. Wind whistled as the punch was unleashed. Just by listening to the sound, one could determine the power of this punch. Boom! Beta Persei, who had hurriedly returned a punch, stood there as steady as Mount Tai, as if the punch just now was not his arm at all. The man who threw out the first punch couldn't help but stagger. He took 2 steps back before stabilizing himself. At this moment, his eyes were filled with anger. Who was Qiqing? With his background, it could be said that he could do whatever he wanted in Hangzhou Prefecture. Not many people could control him. But now not only did someone stop him, he was even forced to take 2 steps back in the domain that he was most proud of. This was not as simple as just suffering a loss. It had reached the level of humiliation. Qiqing had another title, Hangzhou Divine Fist. But just now the punch he had thrown out was a preemptive strike. Yet, not only was it casually dispelled by someone else, the other party didn't even move an inch, but he was forced to take 2 steps back. This was somewhat inconceivable. What's going on? Master Qi. The commotion here finally attracted the attention of others. When they saw Qiqing's face alternating between white and red, the 7 men who were originally surrounding him and flattering him all gathered together. Then they glared angrily at Beta Persei, who was standing there motionless. If anger could kill, Beta Persei would have died countless times by now. Yang Chendong, who was walking in front, also heard the commotion behind him. Although he did not have eyes in the back of his head, and did not see what had just happened, he believed in Beta Persei. If the other party had not provoked him first, Beta Persei would never have made a move. While Yang Chendong was still thinking about what had happened, his 4th brother, Yang, had already strode over, shouting as he walked over. What's going on? Who ate the bear's heart and leopard's gall? Looking for trouble, huh? This was the way of the foppish. No matter what happened, it was always necessary to gain the upper hand by a show of strength. Perhaps if they were lucky, they could directly intimidate the other party into not daring to speak again. Then it would be much easier to solve the problem. Of course, people who dared to speak like this more or less had to have some background. Otherwise, there would always be a moment when they would be exposed and unable to continue pretending. Of course, Yang was considered to have some background. Putting everything else aside, just by mentioning his sixth brother's name, he could do whatever he wanted in the capital. There were not many people who were blind enough to offend him. But the capital was the capital after all, and this was Hangzhou. None of them knew Yang Yang. Seeing that someone had suddenly walked over while shouting and charging straight at them, Qi Qing, who had suffered at the hands of Beta Persei, had a flash of anger on his face. Then he suddenly gave up on the confrontation with Beta Persei and changed his target to Yang Yang, charging straight at him. Perhaps as a martial artist, he could tell that Yang Yang was only good at talking, so he wanted to pick on the weaker one to show his strength. But what he did not know was that this time, he had picked the wrong opponent. Although Yang Chendong was not good at martial arts and only relied on brute force to fight, how could he let his fourth brother be at a disadvantage when Yang Chendong was here? Just as Qi Qing suddenly rushed over, another figure had already rushed out first. Then with a bang, after a loud sound, a human figure continuously retreated until his body hit 2 tables in succession. Only then did he stop. Although his figure had stopped, he was still in an extremely sorry state. His originally clean clothes were stained with vegetable soup and oil, and he looked like a drowned rat. Standing opposite him was a young man who was not tall but had a very sturdy body. His eyes were cold, and at this moment he was squatting in a firm horse stance. His eyes were full of provocation. After being pushed back twice in a row, Qi Qing only felt a sense of suffocation in his chest. Usually when he fought with people in Hangzhou, how many of them could withstand a few moves from him? Because of this, he gained the reputation of the Hangzhou Godly Fist. For this reason, he even founded a martial arts center called the Boxing Hall. Many people in the martial arts world would respectfully clasp their fists and greet him when they saw him. Sect leader Qi. That was a very honorable thing to do. But today he had actually suffered 2 losses in a row in front of a group of people. He had lost to 2 different people, and both times he had gained the upper hand by striking first. How could this not make him angry? He felt that all the moves he had learned in the past seemed to have become useless. Qi Qing, who had lost a lot of face, could not swallow this bitter fruit. He glanced at his friends who came with him, and evil grew from his guts. He pointed at Beta Persei and the others and shouted, "Everyone, let's go together and cripple them. If anything happens, I, Qi Qing, will be responsible." The 7 people around him were all here for Qi Qing. They more or less had something to ask of this person in the future. Now that their benefactor had spoken, there was no reason to not listen. They thought that this was Hangzhou, and everyone was more or less people of status. They were just a group of brave foreigners, so what was there to be afraid of? With this thought in mind, the 7 of them first exchanged glances across the air, then shouted and rushed toward Beta Persei and the others. And from the looks of it, 3 or 4 of them had learned martial arts. At least when they fought, their postures were very good. Chiovi, go easy on them. Don't kill them. Yang Chendong had already seen the situation clearly. Although he did not know the reason, these people had come to find fault with them again and again. Since that was the case, there was no need to be polite. He just needed to teach them a lesson. Chiovi, who had defeated Qi Qing earlier and whose eyes were filled with murderous intent, heard Yang Chendong's order. He immediately nodded, and then waved his hand. 7 people from the first guard team walked out to meet the 7 opponents who were shouting and rushing toward them. They were not equal in strength to begin with. When they fought, the situation was naturally one-sided. Among the 7 people, even the so-called martial arts master who had learned 2 styles could only block 1 move from the members of the Cold Front team. Then he was beaten up passively. The shouts of being beaten quickly spread throughout the 2nd floor of the restaurant. What happened here had already frightened the other diners. Those who were timid had already run out, leaving behind those who were bold. When they saw Qi Qing being beaten up, they all ran away. This might be the influence of evil people, because Qi Qing was an evil person, who knew if he would find trouble with those who saw him suffer after he recovered from his shock. All the unrelated people had run away, leaving only Boss Sun of Xinglong Restaurant. He was also helpless. The monk could run away, but the temple could not. It was probably describing people like him. Stop fighting. It's all a misunderstanding. It's all a misunderstanding. Sect Master Qi is a person of status. You guys stop. Boss Sun tried to stop the fight, but he was afraid that he would be hurt. He pretended to go forward and shouted loudly, as if he wanted to use these words to scare the foreigners who came to his restaurant for the first time. In fact, there was no need for Boss Sun to shout. The members of the Cold Front team had already stopped. This kind of blindly beating people up did not feel good. It was like an adult facing a 3-year-old child. No matter how they beat, they would lose interest. Let's go. Yang Chendong could also see that this was not a fair fight. He shook his head disinterestedly. With Yang Chendong's words, the members of the Cold Front team naturally returned to their team. However, when they left the restaurant, everyone was clearly more vigilant. In the dark, the people from the Security Bureau had already seen everything. Then they began to carry out their activities. Chapter 336. There was a large courtyard in the East District of Hangzhou. This was one of the outer residences of the Chang clan, a wealthy merchant in the south. Chang Qianhao, as the eldest son of the Chang clan and the future head of the Chang clan, was carefully standing in front of the man in green clothes in the courtyard. Qianhao, there are no outsiders here, so you don't have to be so restrained. Standing in front of him was Yang Chendong. When he saw Chang Qianhao's serious and even somewhat nervous appearance, he tried to use words to enlighten him. The more he said this, the more nervous and cautious Chang Qianhao became. Master, the ancients said that a teacher for a day is a father for life. You have done a great favor for Chang Qianhao and the Chang clan. Okay. Knowing what he was going to say next, Yang Chendong gently patted his forehead and said helplessly, regarding the matter of handing over the Heavens Beyond Trading Company in the south to the Chang clan. As my student, you naturally have a certain connection, but more importantly, I still considered the strength of the Chang clan. Besides, not only your Chang clan but the other clans in the south also have resources allocated. This is originally a normal business, so you don't have to be so grateful to me. No. Master, the ratio of the Chang clan is the highest. For this matter, the grandfather in charge of the clan has already sent a letter to Qianhao, asking me to take care of Master's food and accommodation no matter what, but I don't know if there is anything that Master is dissatisfied with. No, everything is very good, very good. Yang Chendong chuckled. He could feel the admiration and gratitude of this student to him. Some of the rare goods of Heavens Beyond were indeed distributed to the Chang clan due to the fact that the other party was his student. However, he still couldn't accept such an action of greeting twice a day. Young Master Yang San is here. The timely appearance of Tiger's mane could be considered as a solution. Chang Qianhao had studied in the Yang Clan Academy for half a year, so he naturally knew that the identity of the person who came was not simple. He also knew that Yang Chendong had something important to do, so he respectfully took his leave and said that he would come to pay his respects before dinner. Chang Qianhao respectfully left. Yang Chendong didn't wait for Tiger's mane to speak and spoke first. Look after him. I don't have time to see him tonight, so he doesn't have to pay his respects. Oh. Tiger's mane wanted to laugh, but he didn't dare to. He naturally saw that because of Chang Qianhao's excessive enthusiasm, the young master was already vexed. All right, let Yang San in. Yang Chendong could see that he was gloating a little, but he also knew that there were some things that he ordered, and the other party would do very well. Otherwise, he wouldn't have become his best confidant. Speaking of business, Tiger's man did not dare to be negligent in the slightest. He turned around and left. Yang Chendong soon followed him to Yang Chendong. Then some specific information about Qi Qing was sent to him. Hangzhou Divine Fist? Qi Bus Hen? Interesting. Yang Chendong's voice sounded from the courtyard with a smile that was not a smile. Hangzhou Government Office. In the backyard, a wailing sound came from one of the rooms. The sound was so loud that everyone in the courtyard became very cautious. A middle-aged man dressed in a fourth-rank official's robe was currently pacing back and forth in the courtyard. Perhaps it was due to his anxiety, but all the servants in the courtyard were extremely cautious, as if they were afraid that they would do something that they shouldn't do and provoke this official, resulting in them being severely punished. The man's name was Qi Bushen. He was the prefect of Hangzhou, a fourth-rank official. The wailing man in the room was Qi Qing, who was beaten up. He was also Qi Bushan's cousin. The two of them grew up together and had a very good relationship. When he returned with wounds all over his body, the entire estate was in chaos. The steward of the estate immediately invited a famous physician from Hangzhou Prefecture to examine his illness. The screams in the room earlier were probably due to the commotion caused by the palpation. Creak. The door of the room was pushed open from the inside. Then, the housekeeper accompanied a doctor who was carrying a medicine box and walked out. Qi Bushen, who saw all of this, quickly went up to the doctor and asked anxiously, "How is he?" Reporting to the prefect, sect leader Qi did not suffer any internal injuries. There is only one fracture and many bruises on his body. I'm afraid that he will need to rest for a period of time before he can recover, the doctor answered carefully. Oh, thank you. Men, double the consultation fee and send the doctor out. Qi Bushen waved his hand, and then entered the room with the housekeeper. Then he saw Qi Qing lying on the bed and whimpering softly. Noticing that someone had come, Qi Qing's voice became louder. When he saw that it was his cousin, his voice became even louder. He cried out in pain and said, "Cousin, you must avenge your younger brother. You don't know how arrogant the people on the other side were. They just said that they didn't like me and beat me up. When I asked them if they still cared about the law, they still ignored me." The guilty party complained first. All of this was reflected in Qi Qing's actions. And it seemed that Qi Bushen was very receptive to it. Bastards, they actually dare to ignore the laws of the great Ming dynasty. They are truly lawless. Housekeeper, immediately find out where those people are staying, and then order the bailiffs to arrest them. This official wants to see if they really have 3 heads and 6 arms and are really ignoring the laws. Since the master had said so, the housekeeper originally wanted to ask if they should investigate the other party's identity first. However, at this moment, he could only suppress these words in his heart. At this moment, he was unlucky and said something that he should not say. It was not a wise thing to do. If he did not do it well, he might even vent his anger on himself. How could Qi Bushen, who could become the prefect of Hangzhou and a 4th-rank official, be stupid? However, he still did not send anyone to investigate. It was all based on his strong self-confidence. He was the prefect of Hangzhou and the local emperor of this piece of land. With this kind of power, how many people could make him feel afraid? Not to mention, he also had a very strong backer. Even if there were some problems, he was the kind of person who would protect him. Based on these 2 points, he was naturally fearless. He wanted to let those who hurt his cousin know that the Qi family was not in existence that anyone could provoke. The housekeeper went out and quickly found that those who hit Qi Qing were living in the outer residence of the Chang family. When he found out about these things, the housekeeper felt confident. Although the Chang family was very rich, they were after all just businessmen. Since ancient times, people did not fight with officials. How could they be a match for the officials? Feeling confident, the housekeeper found his relative, Niuji, who was arranged to be a constable in the prefect of Hangzhou. Niuji's nickname was Niu-heir. It was because he was the second son in the family that he got this name. Since he was young, his body was better than others. Later on, he learned martial arts from a famous teacher for a few years. After he learned martial arts, he found the housekeeper's relative and was arranged to be the head of the constables in the prefectural government. With the housekeeper's help, naturally, this constable's life was smooth. This time there was a good thing again. Of course, he would not forget Niuji. When Niuji received the housekeeper's order, he knew that this was a good job to please the prefectural government. He did not dare to be tough. Immediately, he led a group of constables to the outer residence of the Chang family. At this time, the outer residence of the Chang family was shrouded in darkness. It seemed to be very quiet, but in fact in the darkness, there were many pairs of eyes staring at this place. During the day, they beat someone in Xinglong restaurant. It was said that they had some influence in the local area. According to the rule that caution was the parent of safety, Tiger's Mane had arranged for people to wait for a long time. Reality proved that this waiting was not in vain. Not long after nightfall, there was a burst of noisy footsteps on the street in the distance. Then a walking fire dragon came straight in this direction. That was the state when the bailiffs of the manor walked with torches. They're coming, they're coming. They're all ready. Once the order is given, we'll start immediately. Tigerhead, Tiger Ray's nickname, said that we have to be quick and clean. Yang Wu's voice came out. This time, Yang Si and Yang Lu were left behind in Yang village, and the capital to be in charge of the work there. He was lucky to be brought out. Seeing that there was a battle to fight, he was very excited. With Yang Wu as the leader, they borrowed a platoon of Lungfeng from Wuxing camp. In addition, there was the cooperation of the second guard, Dao Xiao, and the Ghost Shadow Sniper team in the dark to deal with any unexpected situations. With such a lineup, not to mention some constables and constables of the prefectural government, even if a few hundred Ming soldiers came, they would not be afraid at all. The fire dragon came closer and closer. The one at the front holding a torch was the constable Niu Ji. When he saw the outer residence of the Chang family from afar, he waved his hand majestically and said, "Go, surround them. Remember, don't let anyone escape." Niu Ji's voice was not soft. He was not worried that such a shout would scare them away. This might be his arrogance and conceit. However, regardless of whether he was careless or cautious, he was destined to suffer tonight. Just like now, when Niu Ji's voice sounded, the 20 or so constables and constables were about to split up. Suddenly, the surroundings lit up. High-voltage flashlights were suddenly turned on. When dozens of light beams shone on them, it made them feel as if they were instantly blinded. What's going on? Niu Ji raised his right hand to block his eyes that were temporarily blinded by the light, and asked casually. Even at this moment, he did not know that he had already become a fish on the chopping block in the eyes of others. Pa! Clang! Clang! Ouch! All kinds of painful cries rose and fell at this moment. Each of the constables and constables who were like wolves and tigers a moment ago had turned into soft-footed shrimps. Some of them bent over and fell to the ground, wailing in pain. Among them, Niu Ji was the one who received the most attention. Just now, after he shouted out, "What's going on?" he suddenly heard a gust of wind. As someone who had practiced martial arts, he instinctively stepped back. However, he only took one step back before he was suddenly tripped by something. Then he felt a sharp pain in his chest. Based on his intuition, he knew that someone had stepped on him. Chapter 337. This kick might not have been as heavy as 1,000 pounds, but it made him lose the ability to resist in an instant. Even he, the leader, was beaten to the ground in an instant. It was conceivable that the other brothers would not have a good time. The Lungfeng soldiers made their move. They originally had a thorough plan. Since they had encountered some people who had underestimated them, how could they be courteous? Naturally, they greeted them with a good beating. Waves of cudgels came down. If it was not for the fact that they did not have the intention to kill, the more than 20 people who had come would have all died here. After the time it took for half an incense stick to burn, the one-sided beating slowly stopped. Niu Ji and the others were already covered in wounds, and no longer had the arrogant appearance they had before. Come on, tie them up. If anyone refuses to submit, just serve them with cudgels. Yang Wu stood in the crowd, his voice filled with pride. This time he did not act impulsively. Hu Tu had said that this was the young master's order. Since he had received the order, if he did not exercise his fist properly, wouldn't he be wasting the mission and opportunity Hu Tu had given him? After the order was given, the Lungfeng soldiers took out the ropes that they had prepared earlier and started to work. However, the expected resistance did not happen. Perhaps they were really afraid of being beaten. Since ancient times, soldiers had always been used to catch thieves. Since when had thieves ever caught soldiers? And they just happened to encounter it. Who would be so stupid as to shout and scream? Soon, the originally noisy street became quiet again. If someone were to pass by this place at this time, they would never think that the dozens of officers had just been violently beaten up here. Yang Wu and the others were still staring with their eyes wide open, waiting for the enemy to come. According to their thinking, the sudden disappearance of more than 20 officials who had been sent out would cause a commotion. It was even reasonable that the Ming Dynasty's Hangzhou City Guard Association would take action. Unfortunately, one night had passed. When the sky began to brighten, indicating the arrival of a new day, there was still no movement. This made Yang Wu really disappointed. Back to the Qi residence, Qi Bushin's residence. Early in the morning, he was still hugging his concubine to sleep when suddenly, the housekeeper's shouting voice came from outside. "Master, it's not good. It's not good, master." "What happened?" Qi Bushen, who had just woken up from his dream, got up from his bed with a face full of displeasure. He casually put on a piece of clothing and opened the bedroom door. Then, he scolded the housekeeper who was yelling outside. "Old master is fine, but you are disturbing his sleep early in the morning. What are you trying to do? I'm telling you, if you don't give me a reason, I won't let you off today. Master, it's not good." Niuji and the rest did not return for the entire night. I wonder where they went. Could he have been killed by those people? The housekeeper did not listen to what Qi Bushen had to say. Instead, he spoke in a panic. Last night, after assigning Niuji an errand, he came back to sleep. This was not the first time he had done such a task. All he had to do was to issue the order, and then get up in the morning to see the results. However, when he went to the magistrate's office in the morning, he found out that Niuji and more than 20 other people had disappeared from the face of the earth. They were nowhere to be found. The bailiffs who stayed behind thought that Constable Niu had something important to do and needed to go somewhere far away, so they didn't see him for the whole night and didn't report to him. When the housekeeper heard the news, he immediately panicked. The Chang family's courtyard was in Hangzhou Prefecture City and was not far from the magistrate's office. It would take at most half an hour to get there. How could they not return for the whole night? His intuition told him that something must have happened. At that moment, he ran back to the Qi family's mansion and woke up his master. Initially, Qi Bushin's face was still full of anger. However, after hearing the housekeeper's words, he was stunned. After a few breaths, he finally reacted and exclaimed loudly, "How is this possible? How is this possible? Master, it's true. Those people must be very daring. Master, it's been a night. No one knows what will happen. Why don't we report it to the magistrate?" The housekeeper was so frightened that he was incoherent. He stood there trembling as he made his suggestion. "Report it to the magistrate? Bastard, master is the magistrate." Qi Bushen was so angry that he couldn't help but curse. No, master, what I meant was to report to the Hangzhou guards and have them send troops into the city. Perhaps only with their appearance will we be able to suppress those daring criminals. The butler realized that he had made a slip of the tongue. After correcting himself, he hurriedly replied. After being reminded, Qi Bushin's originally panicked expression flashed with joy. However, he shook his head. No way. This is a serious matter. We still need to investigate it clearly. If it's a misunderstanding, then it will be a big joke. Once the Hangzhou guards were alerted and the army was mobilized, the matter would inevitably be reported to Nanjing. If it really alarmed the emperor and the imperial court, there would not be much room for negotiation. Qi Bushen shook his head and decided to clarify the matter first. The so-called clarification of the matter naturally fell on the housekeeper's head. The housekeeper naturally had a headache about this task. However, since it was his master who said it, he certainly did not dare to refuse. After agreeing, he rushed back to the magistrate's office. After returning to the magistrate's office, the housekeeper selected another 20 bailiffs and 4 constables who had learned martial arts. They went straight to the Chang family's residence. This time it was broad daylight. He did not believe that anyone would dare to do anything to him. Of course, he was not unprepared. When he left a message in the magistrate's office. If he did not return in 2 hours, he was to inform his master and send troops to rescue him. Being prepared did not guarantee that he would not be afraid. He still felt a little uneasy when he arrived at the Chang family's residence. Unexpectedly, the door was already open. It was as if they knew that someone would come. When they saw the team he brought from afar, a man with a smile on his face came up to greet them. "May I know who you are? Please tell me." The other party was so polite that the housekeeper did not dare to force him. He thought that it would be impolite not to reciprocate. He clasped his fist and said, "I am the housekeeper of the magistrate of Hangzhou. My surname is Wu. Housekeeper? The person in front of him did not wait for him to finish his words. He shook his head and said, "With all due respect, this matter is not something that a housekeeper like you can shoulder. You should go back and ask your master to come here personally." After he finished speaking, the person in charge of welcoming the guest turned around and left. It was obvious that he was a little unhappy. Steward Wu knew that his status was still a little low, but since he was already here, he couldn't possibly not get to the bottom of things, right? He rushed towards the other party's departing figure and shouted, "Hey, are Niuji and the others in your hands? What did you do to them?" "Niuji? Haha, you mean the one who was beaten into a pig's head. If you want to know what happened to him, ask your master to come here personally." The man did not even turn his head. His figure gradually disappeared. After he returned to the residence, he closed the door. The man was Yang Wu. He was asked by the sixth young master to welcome the guest outside the door. He originally thought that the person who came would be the magistrate of Hangzhou. If the magistrate was sensible, it would not be a big deal. However, the person who came was just a housekeeper. Under the difference in status, there were many things that could not be discussed. Finally, he received news about Niuji and the others. After confirming that it was the other party who did it, the housekeeper turned around and left. His face was no longer nervous and fearful. Instead, it was burning with anger. How dare they detain the officials? Based on this alone, the other party was doomed. Half an hour later, the Hangzhou guard station nearby made their move. With 200 cavalrymen in the lead, 500 infantrymen followed closely behind. The large group of people entered Hangzhou from the southern city. They galloped on the streets, causing a lot of chaos. The commander of the Hangzhou guards, Tong Qiao, had a total of 5,600 people under him. The first 1,000 people under him had a total of 1,200 people under him. There were 1,000 people under him. They were usually in charge of the security around Hangzhou. Although they were in charge of security, there were not many things that could make them take action. Unless there was an enemy invading from the sea, most of the time, they were just idling around. This time, they suddenly received a request from the magistrate, Qi Bushen. He said that a group of evildoers had appeared in the city. They had actually detained more than 20 officials privately. It seemed that they had also used some tricks. When the news first came, Tong Qiao did not hear it clearly. Of course, he did not dare to believe it. This was the world of the Great Ming Dynasty. The officials represented the image of the country. How could someone dare to harm them? Could it be that they were not afraid of the law? Or could it be that the status of these people was so high that they could do things without any scruples? However, the next news made Tong Qiao dispel this thought. It was said that the group of evildoers lived in the courtyard of the Chang family, a wealthy merchant in the south. This alone made him feel relieved. It was still the same sentence. The status of merchants was still very low at that time. If they were really people with status, how could they be willing to live in the courtyard of a merchant? It would only lower their status. Even if they were powerless people, Tong Qiao did not mind picking a soft persimmon to pinch. It just so happened that his brothers had not made money for a long time. This was a good opportunity. If it was done well, it would be a big income. Speaking of which, it was the Chang family. It was said that their wealth was comparable to that of a country. As a result, a group of 700 Great Ming soldiers entered the city in a mighty manner. There were already bailiffs from the government office waiting to lead the way. Then the group of people arrived outside the Chang family's courtyard and surrounded it. Guard the front and back doors. No one is allowed to slip away. In a while, when this general gives the order, everyone just needs to rush forward. If anyone dares to resist, use your weapons. Tong Qiao, who was riding on a horse and wearing armor, could be said to be majestic. Under his command, the Chang family's courtyard was soon surrounded by people that not even a drop of water could trickle through. Then, the 200 soldiers of the Great Ming Dynasty bravely walked toward the main door. They were in a row of 10 people. Every time they took a step forward, they would shout. Not to mention that their voices were very uniform, there was some momentum. Chapter 338. In the garden of the Chang family's courtyard. Small bridges, flowing water, lush green grass, mesmerizing flowers, colorful purples, pavilions, and painted rafters. All of them were the work of famous craftsmen. It was just a side courtyard, but it was already so luxurious. It could be seen that the Chang family was indeed rich and imposing. In the middle of the garden there was a pavilion. On the stone table below, there were various fruits and snacks. A young man and an old man were sitting there, drinking tea and chatting. Duke of Loyalty and Courage, we haven't seen each other for nearly 2 years. On the other side of the table, an old man wearing an ordinary long robe had a smile on his face. He seemed to be in a good mood. Sir Kuei is still as elegant as ever. Congratulations. Yang Chendong also had a smile on his face. As he spoke, he raised the teacup in his hand. Haha, Duke of Loyalty and Courage must be joking. I still have to thank you for everything. If it weren't for you turning the tide on the battlefield back then, I'm afraid this old man would have been buried long ago. Thank you. Old man Kuang Yi also raised the wine in his arms and sighed with an emotional expression. In the Battle of the Tuma Fortress, because of Wang Zhen's careless command, the morale of the army was in chaos and they were defeated by Walla's army. The officials were either dead or running away. It was complete chaos. At this time, Yang Chendong, who was inconspicuous in the team, stood up and successively saved the 9 important ministers of the imperial court. Later, he even saved the besieged Emperor Zhu Qizhen. Among the 9 officials there was Kuang Yi. In the past he was the Minister of War of the Great Ming Dynasty. Now he was the Minister of War of the Southern Ming Dynasty. It was said that he was trusted by Emperor Yingzong. This time he was ordered by the emperor to check the situation of the various imperial guards. Coincidentally, he learned that Yang Chendong had returned to his hometown to pay respects to his ancestors. Thus, he rushed here early in the morning to meet him. Although it was a coincidence, Yang Chendong had already asked around. Kuang Yi was a good old man. Although he was a little old, he still had some ability. To be able to meet him here and settle some matters was within his plan. At this moment, the two of them were able to meet each other as they wished. Furthermore, they had saved each other's lives as a bond. It could be said that both the host and the guest were extremely happy. However, this harmonious scene was disrupted by the battle cries outside the courtyard. Although Kuang Yi was a little older, his eyes were not blurry and his ears were not deaf. He could naturally hear the shouts outside clearly. He frowned and raised his head to look at Yang Chendong. Yang Chendong, who had long been paying attention to Kuang Yi's actions, smiled and said, "Hee, I don't know why I was targeted yesterday. Some people came to find trouble with me, but they were caught by my subordinates. They must have mobilized the army this time." Nonsense. Who gave them the authority to mobilize the army for something as big as that? Guaning, go take a look. Kuang Yi said with a straight face. This time he didn't come to see Yang Chendong just to catch up. He came with a mission. However, before he even had the chance to ask for help, his own people had already dropped the ball. If he didn't handle things well, it would directly affect his mission. How could he not be angry? Guaning was 7 feet tall and had a powerful body. His muscles seemed like they would explode with power at any time. At a glance, one could tell that he was a martial artist. Of course, the reason why Kuang Yi arranged for him to go out was not only because he was his trusted aide, but also because he was an official of the Ministry of War. He was selected to be the vice director of the Department for Purging Officials, and was a standard 5th rank official. The Department for Purging Officials was an organization under the Ministry of War during the Ming and Qing dynasties. It was responsible for the rank, selection, promotion, and rewards of the military officials. It was responsible for inspecting the strategic locations of various regions and setting up camps. It was also responsible for managing the inheritance and bestowments of the tribal officials who lived in communities of ethnic minorities. Most of the time, the rank of an official in the Great Ming Dynasty wasn't enough. The most important thing was how much power he had. For example, the first Grand Secretary of the Imperial Cabinet was equivalent to the Emperor's personal secretary. For example, Jie Jin during the Ming Dynasty was a standard 5th rank official. Don't underestimate a standard 5th rank official. Even in front of the emperor he could speak. He was much more powerful than a standard 4th or 3rd rank official. For example, Guanning was only a standard 5th rank official. However, because he controlled the promotion and rewards of the military officials, he had great power. Even many of the commanders, standard 3rd rank officials, of the City Guard Institute and the Capital Guard Institute had to lower their heads and smile apologetically when they saw him. Since the Capital Guard Institute had been mobilized, it was appropriate to send Guanning to take a look. Yang Chendong was naturally aware of this. He immediately smiled and said politely, "Then I'll have to trouble you, Vice Director Guan." "You're too polite." Guan Ying's expression didn't change. After saying this with a serious face, he bowed to Kuang Yi and left. After Guanning left, Kuang Ye's laughter sounded again. "Duke of Loyalty, please don't mind him. This person's personality is like this. He doesn't smile much, but he is very serious and has some ability. Yes, to be able to learn from Lord Kuang, he is without a doubt a talent." Yang Chendong also smiled and flattered. Then he raised the teacup in his hand. With Guanning taking care of the outside matters, he naturally didn't have to worry. Kuang Yi also smiled and raised his teacup. After taking a sip, he put it down and said, "Duke of Loyalty, a while ago the Japanese suddenly invaded the border and attacked the Tianjin Guard. I'm sure you've heard about it." "Yes, this matter caused a lot of disputes in the Beiming Imperial Court. How could I not know about it?" Yang Chendong seemed to be casually nodding, but in fact, only he knew that Kuang Yi had finally begun to talk about the main topic. "Yes. I heard that 20,000 soldiers and 20,000 commoners were captured. How could the Duke of Yu not be angry about such a big matter?" Kuang Yi seemed to sigh. Then he continued, "I heard that even now, the Japanese warriors often appear between the Tianjin Guard and the capital. Duke of Loyalty, you are going to pass by that place. Have you met them?" Yang Chendong didn't express any dissatisfaction with Kuang Yi calling the Daizong Emperor Yuwang. Originally, Zhu Qiyu was the Duke of Yuwang. If it weren't for the change of Tu Mu, he wouldn't have become the emperor. As a follower of Zhu Qizhen, it wasn't strange that Kuang Yi didn't admit this. However, to ask about the Japanese warriors and whether he had met them was somewhat interesting. No, this duke was lucky and didn't meet them. Haha, yes, the Duke of Loyalty's luck has always been very good. Saving Yuwang, retreating from the Walla, building the bank and so on, everything went too smoothly, right? When he uttered the last word, Kuang Ye's gaze suddenly sharpened as he looked at Yang Chendong. Feeling the coldness of the gaze, which seemed to be able to see through people's hearts, Yang Chendong didn't even lift his eyelids and smiled. "Yes, the heavens are good to me." A calm and confident smile flashed across Yang Chendong's face. In Kuang Ye's eyes, all of this made him feel unreal. Kuang Yi wasn't young. In the imperial court, he was second only to Hu Xiao. He was also a man in his 60s. He had interacted with Yang Chendong many times, but even at that time, he only had a trace of respect for him. He didn't feel as powerless as he did when facing Yang Chendong. The young man in front of him was only in his early 20s, but he felt as if he was even more difficult to deal with than his father, Yang Rong. It seemed that no matter how he probed and provoked the young man was like an impenetrable wall. Under the pavilion, it suddenly became quiet. At this moment, only a gentle breeze flashed in front of them. Of course, in their hearts, they were weighing each other's words. Their chests were heavily panting, and their minds were working quickly. Ha ha ha, the Duke of Loyalty's luck is indeed very good, and you are also very talented. This old man has seriously studied the snow of the Yang family, that you rode in front of the Yang family academy. It is truly majestic and enlightening, but I don't know how to interpret the phrase, a man of great talent. Although because of Yang Chendong, the Great Ming dynasty was divided into the south and many officials and soldiers belonged to two different imperial courts, one thing remained unchanged. That was, the poetry that scholars liked was still the same. Thinking back, when the snow of the Yang family was spread to the capital of the southern imperial court, Nanjing, it caused a huge uproar. When many people were sighing at the grandeur of this poem and were amazed by the sentences, it was inevitable that they would wonder what kind of environment and inner thoughts the author of this poem, Yang Chendong, was in to create such a song that could be passed down. There were even some people who began to research the specific meaning of the phrase. Especially the phrase to count the outstanding figures. There were even more explanations for it. For example, the people of the Ying sect who were hostile to the Dai sect explained that Yang Qindong was flattering Zhu Qiyu, saying that Zhu Qiyu's ascension was justified, legitimate, and reasonable. They said that he was a man of great talent, and Zhu Qizhen was not. There were also some people who were envious, jealous, and hateful who explained that this sentence meant that Yang Qindong looked down on all scholars in the world. It was a manifestation of his own arrogance. There were also some people who wanted to see the world in chaos who said that this meant that someone wanted to replace Yang Qindong. They were implying that Yang Qindong was a traitor like Cao Cao. Among these opinions, Kuang Yi was more inclined to the latter, but he didn't say this to anyone. As the Minister of War, he, who knew soldiers well, was shocked when he saw the calm performance of the cold front soldiers on the battlefield. With such outstanding soldiers, any one of them would be qualified to be a squad leader, or even a centurion, or even a general of a higher rank. But they were willing to work under Yang Qindong. What did this mean? Chapter 339. Even though there were rumors that those people were mercenaries and that Yang Qindong was willing to spend a lot of money to hire them, Yi Qindong did not believe it. Others might believe such a reason, but Kuang Yi would never believe it no matter what. It was because he had led soldiers before and knew the importance of elite soldiers. At least in front of him, if he had such elite soldiers, he would never give them to others, even if the other party offered a high price. Not to mention, with such elite soldiers, what kind of money could he not earn? Why would he need to hire them? He had such thoughts at the beginning, but because he was indebted to someone for saving his life, he naturally could not criticize them in front of them or behind their backs. But as time passed, these elite mercenaries had been following Yang Qindong all this time, and this suspicion became heavier and heavier. What he said just now was just to test and confirm. Unfortunately, he did not get a good result, which made him a little disappointed. At the same time, he also wondered if Yi Qindong was speechless and wanted to gloss over it. While Kuang Yi was thinking about this, Yang Qindong spoke. Sir Ji, do you mind if I tell you a story? Oh, I'm all ears. Kuang Yi did not know what the other party meant, but he still smiled and agreed out of politeness. Moreover, with Yang Qindong's talent, even an ordinary story would be quite interesting in his mouth. Seeing that Kuang Yi agreed, Yang Qindong first smiled politely, then opened his mouth and said, Once upon a time, there was a scholar who wanted to go out for a walk because he was tired of studying at home. Unexpectedly, he encountered an injured man who had fainted. Out of kindness, he saved the man and found a doctor to treat him. Not long after, the man's body recovered. When he left, he said that he wanted to repay his kindness. At this point, the corners of Yang Qindong's mouth curled up slightly, giving people the feeling that he was recalling something interesting, but only he knew that he was laughing at the absurdity and nonsense of this story. It was all because this was indeed a story, a fabricated story. The man said that he wanted to repay his kindness, so of course the scholar did not care. It was just a casual effort and he did not take it seriously. But who would have thought that not long after, the burly man would fulfill his promise? Not only did he send a lot of gold and silver, he also sent a lot of people to protect the scholar. He said that the scholar had saved his life, so seeing the scholar was like seeing himself. At this point of the story, Yang Qindong suddenly closed his mouth. After a few breaths he said again, From then on, this scholar naturally gets whatever he wants. Now that I think about it, if it wasn't the heavens taking care of him, then what was? When the story finally came to an end, Kuang Yi fell into silence. From the beginning of the story he thought of something. When the story came to an end, he finally understood that this so-called story was actually a fact. The scholar must be Yang Qindong, and the man he saved must be the leader of the mercenaries. If that was the case, everything made sense. This was also the main reason why the mercenaries could be used by Yang Qindong. But, is this true? If the leader of the mercenaries was so powerful, why would he appear in front of Yang Qindong in an injured state? This did not seem to make sense. Since today's story had reached this point, Kwang Yi naturally had to ask clearly, so he asked all the questions in his heart. Lord Kwang, good question. At that time, the scholar was also a little confused, but he slowly learned from the elite soldiers that the burly man he had saved had been plotted against because he was trying to snatch the position of the boss. That was why he had escaped all the way to the city where the scholar lived. Later, he recovered from his injuries and went back to take back everything. That was how simple it was. Yang Chendong spread out his hands and smiled at Kwang Yi. Since he wanted to tell a story, how could he not have thought about it from the beginning to the end? The story was not exciting, but it was still passable. At this moment, Kwang Yi did not know what to say. Should he continue to question him? But he already explained it to him. If he continued to ask, he would be accused of pestering endlessly. As expected, before Kwang Yi could continue, Yang Chendong said, Lord Kwang, to be honest, I have never told anyone about this before. You are the first, so if possible, I hope you can keep it a secret for me. As soon as he said this, Kwang Yi was completely speechless. The other party had put on such a sincere appearance, and had even saved his life. What else could he ask? No matter what, he was still an educated person. He couldn't possibly be so shameless as to throw away his basic dignity. At this moment, the only thing he could do was nod his head and accept the favor. Thank you for your loyalty. This old man was too rash. Sigh, Lord Kwang, please don't say that. Everyone is curious. If it was me, I might ask too. It's fine, it's fine. Haha, drink tea, drink tea. Yang Chendong said with a laugh and put on a kind face. Outside the Chang residence, Tong Qiao aggressively led his men to surround this place, and then commanded his men to start approaching step by step. From the looks of it, it seemed that a big battle was unavoidable. Perhaps it wouldn't be long before this place would be littered with corpses. However, just when everyone was extremely nervous, the originally tightly shut door of the Chang family's courtyard suddenly opened from the inside. Then, a sturdy man appeared in front of everyone. Prepare to charge. Stop. All of you stop. Tong Qiao, who was about to give the order, was ready to let the soldiers charge. However, when he saw the person who appeared, his mouth first formed an O shape and then he shouted loudly at his men, as if he was afraid that someone would suddenly attack. The sudden shout stunned the soldiers of the Great Ming Dynasty, who were full of morale. At this moment, Tong Qiao had already dismounted from his horse and trotted over. When he reached the front door, and saw that the person in front of him was indeed Minister Councillor Guanning, he hurriedly cupped his hands and bowed. Lord Guan. General Tong, what is the meaning of this? After Guanning cupped his hands and bowed, he pointed at the rows of Great Ming Dynasty soldiers who had already appeared outside the door. This question made Tong Qiao's expression change greatly. He originally thought that there was a villain here, and that the magistrate of Hangzhou had asked for help. He thought that since this was related to the Chang residents, it would be a good opportunity to take advantage of them. At that time he could casually ask for tens of thousands of silver taels. He did not expect that Guanning would appear here. Although Guan Ying's official rank was not as high as his, he held great power. He was the kind of person who could not be offended. In particular, he had heard that Guanning was the favorite student of the current Minister of War, Kwang Yi. The city guard's office was also under the jurisdiction of the Ministry of War. When he thought of this, he broke out in a cold sweat. What's wrong? Is the weather very hot? General Tong, why are you sweating so much? Guan Ying's expression was still very serious. When he said these words, it did not seem like he was concerned, but more like he was questioning something. This. Tong Qiao rolled his eyes. He knew that it would be stupid to hide the truth at this time. He immediately gritted his teeth and confessed Qi Bushen. It was because Magistrate Qi of Hangzhou said that there were rebels here. So he asked me to lead the soldiers into the city to eliminate them. Rebels? Did they disturb the villagers? Did they occupy the city? Did it cause any chaos? Guanning asked one question after another. According to the regulations of the Ministry of War, if there were rebels in the city and caused great chaos, the city guard's office and the nearby city guard's office had the right to mobilize the army into the city. On the contrary, even if the local officials asked for it, they could not enter the city without permission. This was originally a way to control the army, to prevent them from doing anything out of line. Guanning asked these questions based on this basis. Guanning was doing his job according to the rules. Tong Qiao's face turned pale. At this moment he hated Qi Bushen to death. If it wasn't for the fact that he made the situation sound very serious, and even said that there were profits to be made by entering the city, and that after the matter was over, he could just grab a few people and report to his superiors that it was a mess and that would be the end of the matter. Then he wouldn't have the guts to bring his army into the city. Now not only did he not get any benefits, but he was also caught red-handed. It was conceivable that if this matter was not handled well, he would lose his official position. Although the official rank of the person in front of him was not as high as his, he was in charge of the examination. If he did not clarify the matter, he was afraid that when the person returned to the capital, he would be locked up and questioned. Since he had done something wrong, he had to accept the punishment. Tong Qiao was a straightforward person. Since he could not find a good reason, he lowered his head and said, "Lord Guan, I acted rashly and believed the words of others. I was wrong." Tong Qiao admitted his mistake so straightforwardly. A gratified smile flashed across Guan Ying's face. No matter what, it was good to know one's mistake and be able to change. Let the soldiers retreat. General Tong, please come with me. Tong Qiao thought that Guanning wanted to discuss the conditions with him in private. There was a glimmer of hope in his eyes. He quickly agreed and let the soldiers withdraw, leaving only 2 bodyguards to wait outside. While he was still thinking about what conditions Tong Qiao would discuss with him, and whether he should agree to them, the 2 of them had already arrived at the pavilion in the middle of the residence. Tong Qiao, who was about to continue apologizing, finally saw Kuang Yi, who was wearing a long gown and sitting there. When he first saw him, Tong Qiao thought that his eyes were playing tricks on him. He even rubbed his eyes hard. When he recognized that the other party was indeed the Minister of War, Kuang Yi, he was stunned. It would be better if Guanning was the only one who knew about the deployment of troops. Although Guan Ying's authority was not small, he was still an official. As long as he gave Guanning a way out, there would be room for negotiation. However, if the Minister of War met him, then things would be different. Guanning was the superior who was in charge of him. If Guan Ying's upper lip touched his lower lip, his future would be completely ruined. Chapter 340. Plop. Tong Qiao knelt down in front of Kuang Yi. The moment Tong Qiao knelt on the ground, Guanning walked to Kuang Ye's side and whispered the story of what had happened. Originally, Kuang Ye's expression didn't change as he sat there, but when he heard the last part of the story, his anger rose. After he heard the entire story, he was so angry that he fiercely slammed the stone table and said, "What a bunch of bastards! Where did they put the Great Ming's military law?" Needless to say, he was criticizing Qi Bushen. After saying this, he looked up at Yang Qindong and his expression returned to normal. "Duke of Loyalty and Courage, I'm really sorry for making a fool of myself in front of you." Haha. Yang Qindong's lips curled into a smile. He didn't say anything. Perhaps at this moment, it wasn't appropriate to say anything. "You guys go out and wait. I will talk to the Duke of Loyalty for a while." Kuang Yi waved his hand and dismissed Guanning and Tong Qiao. Tong Qiao, who was nervous, bowed his head and left the courtyard. When Kuang Yi was out of sight, he carefully asked, "Lord Guan, is the Duke of Loyalty that Minister Kuang mentioned the one in the north?" "Well, do you know how big of a mess you almost made this time?" Guanning nodded his head. When he spoke, the accusation in his voice became more and more obvious. In his heart, he was somewhat unconvinced by the Duke of Loyalty, especially when he saw the real person. He found that the real person was so young and did not have 3 heads and 6 arms. There was a trace of contempt in his heart. It was just that Kuang Yi was his teacher, and also his superior. Even his teacher respected the other party so much, so he could not do anything against him. After receiving Guan Ying's accurate answer, cold sweat flowed down his neck. Tong Qiao had long heard of the Duke of Loyalty. This person not only saved the life of the current emperor, Ingzong, but also defeated the elite Walla army. When he thought about how he almost made such a person his opponent, a chill ran down his spine. It really scared him. Under the pavilion, after there was no one else around, Kuang Yi couldn't help but let out a long sigh. Loyal Duke, I'm not afraid of you laughing at me. You also saw that this is our great Ming dynasty's army. What do you mean that he was bewitched by Magistrate Qi of Hangzhou? It's just that he wanted to enter the city to take advantage of us. The fact that Kuang Yi could see through the matter at a glance was enough to prove that this was not the first time something like this had happened. It also proved that his mind was clear. However, Yang Qindong still didn't reply because he knew that the other party didn't come here just for a simple meeting. There should be a deeper meaning. As for what it was, he had a rough guess. He was waiting for the other party to say it. Or it could be said that he was waiting for a good price. Yang Qindong didn't say anything, but Kuang Yi didn't mind. Instead, he continued, Duke Zhongdan, to be honest, the situation in the south isn't good, especially after Zhu Huihua's rebellion caused the Miao people's chaos. Now there's also the chaos in Guangdong. It has already affected several cities and more than a dozen counties. Oh, when did this happen? Yang Qindong had been paying attention to the situation in Guangdong. According to history, this would happen after the chaos in Guangdong. Last year's chaos in Guangdong had already been quelled, but Huang Yuliang had escaped. This time, it was the chaos in Guangdong after his father, Huang Xiaoyang. According to the records, Huang Yuliang was the first to raise his army. However, because of his arrival, Zhu Huihua rebelled first. This was somewhat different from history. I just received an urgent message this morning. As Kuang Yi spoke, he took out a memorial from his arms and handed it to Yang Qindong. Yang Qindong didn't reach out to accept Kuang Yi's kindness. Instead, he waved his hand and said, Lord Kuang, I don't need to read these. You also know that I'm Bai Ming's subject. Now my family, foundation, and even my wife are there. Don't harm me. AI, how can you say that? You saved the emperor's life. The earliest title of Duke Zhongdan was given by Emperor Yingzong. How can you say that you're Bai Ming's subject? Kuang Yi looked like he was seriously trying to reason with him. Okay, Lord Kuang, there's no need to be so clear about this. This time, I'm only returning to my hometown to worship my ancestors. I really don't want to get involved in other things. Besides, Lord Kuang just said that the great Ming dynasty's army is mixed. I'm not an immortal, so how can I help Emperor Yingzong? Yang Qindong waved his hand, showing that he didn't want to continue the conversation. You're not an immortal, but you have a good relationship with the mercenaries. This old man has seen their elegance long ago. They're really the elites of the elites. I'm sure that with their help, the problem will be easily solved. Kuang Yi used this opportunity to finally talk about the main topic. He wanted to use the mercenaries to fight, quell the rebellion, and solve the bandit chaos in the south. Aya, this is making things difficult for me. The number of mercenaries is limited. Moreover, the money needed to hire them is a large number. Can the current imperial court take out that much money? Yang Qindong still refused, but in reality, both sides were testing each other. The southern Ming dynasty was a country that Zhu Qizhen had no choice but to settle for the next best thing. Because everything was forced, the resources that could be obtained were limited. The amount of gold and silver that could be taken from the national treasury was even less. Although in the past year, the situation of the imperial court was much better than when it was first established due to the wealth of the south, it was still far from being able to support two large wars. Yang Qindong said that the cost of hiring the mercenaries was too great. His Majesty really can't take out that much gold and silver. Kuang Yi lowered his head when he said this, but he quickly raised his head again. With an excited expression, he said, But isn't there the Duke of Loyalty and Courage? As long as you're willing to vouch for him, that person owes you his life. No matter what, this face has to be given. And as long as we can quell these two rebellions, the imperial court will be able to collect a lot of taxes in less than 5 years. At that time, it won't be a problem to pay the mercenaries enough money. What do you think? What do you think? Yang Qindong bluntly refused. This was clearly Kuang Yi trying to gain something without risking anything. What 5 years? Who knew what would happen in 5 years? If Kuang Yi wasn't here by then, who would he ask for the money? He would never do such a strenuous and thankless job. The Duke of Loyalty and Courage is a kind person. Could it be that you're just going to watch the people in the south suffer the pain of war and have their families destroyed? Otherwise, the mercenaries can send out troops and take away anything they like along the way. How about that? As he spoke, Kuang Yi finally revealed a part of his trump card. Speaking of which, after the Ming dynasty experienced the rule of Ren Xian, the people were still very rich, especially the aristocratic families and those rich businessmen. There were many priceless antiques, calligraphy, and paintings among them. They were existences like treasures. If they were destroyed during the war, they would really be destroyed. Those that weren't destroyed would be priceless in the future. What Ryukyu Island lacked the most right now was people. What the Great Ming Dynasty had the most was people. If they could take the opportunity to snatch some people back, it would be a great advantage. Speaking of calligraphy and paintings, Yang Chendong had thought more than once about opening a huge museum and putting all the good things inside for future generations to admire and observe. He wanted to feel the deep heritage of this country that had thousands of years of civilization. Kuang Ye's words could be considered to have scratched his itch. Even so, Yang Chendong still didn't agree immediately. Lord Kuang, it's not like that. I just saved his life, and he was willing to send people to protect my life and safety. That's all. If I ask for more, I'll be asking for a yard after taking an inch. Outside the Chang family's courtyard, a luxurious carriage drove out of the mansion and went straight to the Hangzhou government office in the city. Kuang Yi sat in the carriage, and there was some disappointment on his face. He had already tried his best to persuade Yang Chendong. This was also Ing Zong's intention. However, who would have thought that the other party still didn't agree? At the end of their conversation, when he asked if he could arrange for some young Ming generals to go to the mercenary camp for training, Yang Chendong directly rejected him with the reason that the base was a secret place. This kind of behavior that didn't give him any face at all gave Kuang Yi a headache. He thought that he had already shown all his cards, but the other party still didn't take them. What else could he do? The good thing was that business was business, and personal relationships were personal. Yang Chendong had a good impression of him. For his sake, not only did he return Niu Ji and the others who had caused trouble at the Chang family's courtyard, he even sent him out in his own carriage. This was already a great show of respect. Sai, this Duke of Loyalty seems young, but he does things like an old fox. Even if he rejected you, he couldn't get angry. This is also a kind of ability. In the luxurious carriage, a pair of wrinkled old hands touched the luxurious decorations in the carriage. Kuang Yi couldn't help but sigh. Whoosh! A whistling arrow suddenly whistled in the air. Then there was a burst of chaos outside, followed by the voices of Guaning and Tong Qiao. Protect the Lord and catch the assassins. The chaos outside didn't last long. After a series of weapons clashing, it gradually came to an end. Then, Guan Ying's voice came from outside the carriage. Lord, most of the assassins have been killed. Only one escaped and there are still 2 alive. They said that they were here to assassinate the Duke of Loyalty. Assassinate the Duke of Loyalty? Why did they find me? Before he could finish his sentence, Kuang Yi suddenly realized that he was in the luxurious carriage that Yang Chendong usually rode in. He immediately laughed bitterly and said, Sai, I really don't know if they have good intentions or if they did it knowingly. Chapter 341. My lord, what should we do? Guaning, who was outside, naturally did not hear Kuang Ye's muttering. He was still asking for instructions on what to do next. Forget it. Send him to the Duke of Loyalty. Let him deal with him as he sees fit. Kuang Yi lost interest. He did not even bother to ask who was trying to assassinate Yang Chendong. In his opinion, he was young and had power and honor. However, he did not know how to follow good advice. It was normal for such a person to attract assassins. Besides, if he were to poke his nose into other people's business, there was no guarantee that Yang Chendong would not have other thoughts. Since that was the case, he might as well hand the person over and earn a favor. After a short period of chaos, the carriages continued on their way to the Hangzhou government office. At the side door of the Qi residence, which was not far away from the government office, a figure climbed over the wall and quietly entered the Qi residence. The person seemed to be very familiar with the layout of the Qi residence. After a few twists and turns, he arrived at a quiet courtyard. Then he opened a door, causing a creaking sound to be heard as the door opened. As soon as the sound was heard, a scolding sound came from the wooden bed inside the door. "Why are you only here now? I'm bored to death here. And the beauties you found." Just as he finished speaking, there was suddenly no sound. Then the person spoke in a nervous and fearful voice. "Who are you? What do you want? Why are you here? I'm telling you, don't come near me. Otherwise, I know martial arts. I'll take care of you." Ouch. Before he could finish his sentence, the person who spoke was already restrained. A sharp dagger was placed on his neck. It looked like he would bleed if the dagger went any deeper. "I'm not a bad person. Please don't kill me. Whatever you want, I'll give it to you. I have money. I have a lot of money." Qi Qing's face turned pale, and his voice trembled. Spare me, spare me. I'm not a bad person. Please don't kill me." The person who spoke was Qi Qing. After being dealt with by Yang Chendong yesterday, he returned to the Qi residence to recuperate. However, he was not a good person to begin with. Even when he was recuperating, he did not stop. He ordered 2 of his followers to go out and find women for him. Just now, he thought that his subordinates had returned. Unexpectedly, it was an assassin. Moreover, the assassin's skills were not bad. He was subdued in just one move. "I don't want your money. I'm here to give you credit." There was no killing intent in the person's voice. Instead, he spoke in a calm manner. "Come, let me introduce myself. My name is Wu Yong. You must not have heard of my name, but it doesn't matter. Someone knows me, and he wants my life. I've also heard about you. The reason why I'm looking for you is because we have a common enemy. Do you understand now?" Listening to the unhurried introduction of everything, Qi Qing's initial confusion turned into his eyes shining as he nodded his head excitedly. At the Hangzhou government office, knowing that the Minister of War, Kuang Yi, had personally come, the magistrate, Qi Bushen, brought a group of his colleagues to welcome him. The other officials naturally respected and feared Kuang Yi. Especially when they had done something wrong, they felt uneasy. However, as the magistrate of Hangzhou, the boss here, Qi Bushen, did not panic. After all, he was someone with a backer. His brother-in-law was the current Minister of Rights, Lu De. Speaking of Lu De, his strength was not to be underestimated. In the southern Ming dynasty, Yingzong could not return to the capital after his defeat in the Tumu War. He listened to Yang Chendong's suggestion and split the Great Ming dynasty into 2. He came to Nanjing and established the southern Ming dynasty. Since it was an imperial court, it needed the help of hundreds of officials. Zhu Qizhen made the same choice as Baiming, which was to remove the cabinet and let the 6 ministries' minister take the lead and directly answer to the emperor. In other words, Zhu Qizhen and Zhu Qiyu made the same choice. They both wanted to centralize power. After establishing the southern Ming dynasty, the first people to be appointed were the ministers of the 6 ministries. Among them, the Minister of Revenue, Wang Zue, and the Minister of War, Kuang Yi, were restored to their positions. As for the others, Chen Sun, who had come from the northern capital, became the Minister of Personnel, Xiaochua became the Minister of Punishments, Jiang Yuan became the Minister of Works, Shang Lu became the Imperial Censor, and Yin Qian became the Envoy of Transmission. These people all had one thing in common, which was that they were all officials from the capital. However, only the Minister of Rights, Lu De, was appointed. Speaking of which, as the capital of Nanjing, there were 6 ministries in politics, and there was also the existence of the Minister of State. They were in charge of the affairs in the south. The only difference was that their position was half a rank lower than that of the minister of the northern Ming dynasty. It was this half a rank difference that caused the ministers of the southern Ming dynasty to be moved. However, only Lu De remained and was promoted half a rank, becoming the Minister of Rights of the southern Ming dynasty. Merely from this point alone, one could tell that this person was very capable and had very powerful methods. Lu De was a great Confucian scholar and held a very strong position in the eyes of the scholars in the southern Ming dynasty. In addition, he was a slick and sly person, and the Lu family was one of the top aristocratic families in the south. That was why he was the only candidate for the position of Minister of Rights in the entire south. Qi Qing thought that even if Wu Yong failed the assassination, it would have nothing to do with him. In fact, he would have the credit of catching him and sending him over. On the other hand, if Yang Chendong died, Wu Yong would be killed as well. In this way, it would have nothing to do with him. Why wouldn't he be happy to do this kind of thing where he was the good guy? After sending Wu Yong out, he just waited for the good news in the mansion. Back to the Chang family's residence. Wu Yong was actually captured and sent over alive. Yang Wu, who was in charge of security, personally received Qi Qing's 2 attendants. According to them, Wu Yong had intended to assassinate Qi Qing in order to frame the Duke of Zhongdan. However, Qi Qing's title of Hangzhou Divine Fist was not for nothing. He had unexpectedly counterattacked. After figuring out Wu Yong's identity, he had sent Wu Yong away. He said that everything that had happened in Xinglong restaurant was a misunderstanding. Wu Yong's action was to clear up the misunderstanding and mend their relationship. Of course, all of this was Wu Yong's idea. The 2 attendants listened to their master Qi Qing's words and came to take credit. After Yang Wu asked everything, he asked the 2 attendants to wait for a while. He would report this to the Duke of Zhongdan. At that time, they would be rewarded. Wu Yong was tied up tightly and searched from head to toe. After confirming that there was no threat on him, he was sent to the inner courtyard under the escort of Tu Lungfeng. Yang Chendong, who had heard the news, was already on his way here. Wu Yong was once the second in command of the Blackwater Gang. When the Blackwater Gang was destroyed, this person escaped. Then he tried to assassinate him again and again, which made Yang Chendong a little angry. Originally, he thought that since this person was famous for his strategy, it would not be easy to catch him. He did not expect that he would be sent to his door. Yang Chendong certainly wanted to take a good look at this person and see how smart he was and what kind of ability he had. In the side hall of the backyard, Wu Yong was forced to kneel on the ground by Tu Lungfeng. Then the door curtain was lifted and Yang Chendong, dressed in green, strode out. Chapter 342. The moment Yang Chendong appeared, the kneeling Wu Yong struggled with all his might. He glared furiously at Yang Chendong, as though he wanted to kill someone with his gaze. Humph. You're about to die, yet you're still so stubborn. Come on. Let him speak. I'd like to see what he can do. Yang Chendong said coldly as he looked at Wu Yong, whose mouth was gagged with a white cloth. This Wu Yong had tried to assassinate him time and time again, especially the last time in the capital. If he hadn't found that lousy team member Yunb and let the cat out of the bag, Wu Yong would have suffered a small loss. Today, Kuang Yi had caused him to suffer. Now that he had finally captured him, Wu Yong wanted to see what tricks he could play. Upon hearing Yang Chendong's order, the Lungfeng soldier in charge of watching over Wu Yong reached out to pull off the white cloth. At this time, a conspiratorial smile flashed in Wu Yong's eyes. Although it only flashed in his eyes, it was still seen by Yang Chendong, who was staring at him. Instinctively sensing that something was wrong, Yang Chendong suddenly shouted, "Don't let him open his mouth." Before he could finish speaking, the Lungfeng soldier in charge of watching over Wu Yong had already pulled off the white cloth. However, upon hearing the new order, he instinctively reached out to gag his mouth again. At this moment, a thin silver needle suddenly shot out from his mouth. Due to the Lungfeng soldier's obstruction, the needle that was supposed to be aimed at Yang Chendong instead pierced into his right arm. With a suppressed cry of pain, the member of Cold Vanguard staggered and fell to the ground. Tiger's Mane reacted quickly and reached out to support him. Concerned, he asked what was wrong and reached for the injured Lungfeng soldier's arm with his right hand. "Lu Ping, what happened?" Yang Wu, who was standing behind Wu Yong, saw the sudden change in front of him. He stretched out his leg and kicked Wu Yong. With just one kick, Wu Yong's body bent over. It was obvious that this kick was not light. At this moment, Tiger's Mane, who was inspecting the injury on Lu Ping's arm, said, "It's poison. His entire arm has turned black. It looks like he'll have to amputate it if he wants to stay alive." As he spoke, he raised his head to look at young Master Yang Chendong, who was watching everything unfold. Yang Chendong's eyes flashed with reluctance, but he quickly asked calmly, "Lu Ping, for your safety, your right arm has to be cut off to save your life." Lungfeng, who was called Lu Ping, was a very ordinary-looking young man. Judging from his looks, he was probably not even 20 years old. At this moment, due to the poison acting up, his head was covered in layers of cold sweat, and his expression was one of extreme pain. However, when Yang Chendong asked him, he still replied in a clear voice, "Sixth young master, please do it. I'm not afraid of pain. It's just that I won't be able to be a proud member of the Lung Feng soldier in the future. It's not a problem. Even if you lose your right arm, you still have your left arm. You can still do many things. There are many positions in Crimson City that are suitable for you. As long as you're a talent, you won't be buried." After hearing these words, Yang Chendong endured the pain in his heart and stepped forward to pat Lu Ping's left shoulder. Then with an extremely firm tone he said to Tiger's Mane, "Do it. Do it quickly." "Young master, don't worry." Tiger's Mane's eyes were also a little red. After receiving the order, Beta Persei handed over a sharp short knife and a bowl of strong liquor. After receiving the white wine, Lu Ping tilted his head back and poured it into his mouth. Then with a burst of force, he sprayed the highly concentrated white wine onto the short knife. Following the lifting and lowering of the blade, Lu Ping's right arm, which had already turned light black, neatly fell off from his shoulder. The other Lung Feng members hurriedly went forward and carried the unconscious Lu Ping to the back for treatment. Tiger's Mane, Beta Persei, Yang Wu, Yang Chendong, and Wu Yong were left in the side hall. "Young master, it's my fault. I didn't check thoroughly." Yang Wu, who had sent Wu Yong here, had already lowered his head. He had checked Wu Yong's entire body. Only his mouth was not touched because it was sealed shut by the people who sent him here. In the end, it almost caused a huge disaster. Remember, if something like this happens again in the future, remove your mouth. Yang Chendong waved his hand and waved the kneeling Yang Wu away. Then he strode forward and personally grabbed Wu Yong's chin and dislocated it. After doing all this, he personally reached out and removed the white cloth from Wu Yong's mouth. Then he said in a voice full of murderous intent, "You're very good. You dare to play tricks under the young master's nose. Unfortunately, you still didn't get what you wanted. On the contrary, in the following time, you'll understand what it means to beg for death, but not be able to beg for life." Killing people was nothing more than a nod of the head. But this time, he had seriously injured one of the Lung Feng brothers. Hearing him say that he could no longer be the proud member of the Lung Feng team in the future, Yang Chendong felt his heart bleeding. This was far more painful than being cut by a knife. Since others made him suffer, of course he wouldn't let them have it easy. As for the matter of killing people being nothing more than a nod of the head, he directly threw it to the back of his mind. "Yang Wu, I'll leave this person to you. I can use any method to deal with him, but remember, he can't die so quickly. At least, he can't die before we've used up all of our methods, understand? Young master, don't worry. Yang Wu knows what to do." Wu Yong, whose eyes were already filled with fear, was dragged down. Perhaps he knew what kind of fate awaited him, but he actually struggled madly. At the same time, he looked at Yang Chendong as if there were thousands of words in his eyes. Perhaps he would say, "If you want to kill, then kill, let's have a good time," etc. However, Yang Chendong was no longer interested in listening to all of this. He only knew that this matter had angered him. If he didn't vent his anger, he was afraid that he would suffocate to death. Investigate? What's going on? Interrogate the people who sent him here as well. We need to get the results as soon as possible. Yang Chendong stood upright with his hands behind his back. When he spoke, a murderous aura naturally spread out with him as the center. Tiger's Mane, Beta Persei, and Yang Wu at the side didn't dare to be negligent. They turned around and left. Soon, the two attendants of Qi Qing who had sent Wu Yong here were crying for their parents. After a while, Tiger's Mane returned, but the news he brought back was not very good. "Young master, those two people didn't know. When they saw Wu Yong, he was already tied up. Then Qi Qing arranged for them to send him here. No evidence." Yang Chendong nodded gently. "Forget it. Since there's no evidence, then there's no need for evidence. Gather the men, and follow me to the Qi residence to arrest him." When he said this, Yang Chendong's expression had already calmed down. For others, it was simply impossible to go to the local magistrate's residence to arrest someone without any evidence. However, when it came to Yang Qindong, everything became possible. As Lu Ping said, the members of the Cold Vanguard team should be proud. If such a proud person suffered a big loss, as the master, if he couldn't get back at them, then he wouldn't be able to lead them in the future. The Qi residence. The banquet continued. Perhaps it was because Hangzhou cuisine was originally relatively light, or perhaps it was because of Kuang Ye's presence. This banquet didn't have many toasts. For Qi Bushen, Kuang Ye's presence was already enough to explain everything. At least, everything else was secondary. Therefore, he didn't drink too much during the banquet. He only toasted Kuang Yi 3 times and that was it. The banquet wasn't lively, but just as it was about to end, it suddenly became lively. Suddenly, there was a commotion outside the Qi residence. Then there was the sound of the main door crashing to the ground, followed by the sound of footsteps. What's going on? Qi Bushen, who was sitting in the banquet, heard the commotion outside and his eyes immediately darkened. The Minister of War was in his residence today. Who was so blind to make a scene? It was really embarrassing for him. When the housekeeper saw that his master was angry, he had already turned around and walked out. However, before he could figure out what was going on, he saw a black shadow appear in front of him. Then he felt a pain in his stomach and was sent flying. With a plop, he flew 3 to 4 meters in the air and landed in the main hall where the banquet was being held. The commotion outside had already attracted everyone's attention. Suddenly, the housekeeper of the Qi residence was kicked back into the main hall. Out of instinct, Guaning and Tong Qiao both stood up from their seats. The guards behind them also drew their steel swords. Bang! A sudden gunshot rang out and hit the roof of the main hall. This shot caused the guards who wanted to rush out to stop in their tracks. Everyone was panicking at this moment, except for Kuang Yi, who was still sitting in his seat. He only raised his head to look out the window the moment the gunshot was heard. The person who fired the shot was Yang Qindong. When the gunshot rang out, he had already strode into the banquet hall. At this moment his gaze met Kuang Ye's. Then, a smile appeared on his originally calm face. Lord Qi, I'm sorry to have disturbed your refined mood. It's just that I had no choice but to come here today because... He suddenly pointed his gun at Magistrate Qi Bushen, who was sitting at the host's seat. Because someone wanted to kill me and almost succeeded. I have no choice but to seek an explanation for this matter. Yang Qindong's sudden action caused the originally noisy hall to instantly quieten down. Qi Bushen, who had already stood up and wanted to criticize Yang Qindong, fell back into his chair with a plop. Then his face turned pale and his expression changed drastically. Qi Bushen was studious when he was young. He was indeed proficient in the teachings of Confucius and Mencius. Usually, official words came out of his mouth as soon as he opened it. Occasionally, when he spoke about righteous matters, he would be impassioned and make people urinate. However, all of this was based on a theoretical foundation. When faced with a choice of life and death, his mind was already blank. At this moment, he was not thinking about the principles of the saints. He was thinking about whether the gun could shoot bullets and whether it could really kill him. Chapter 343. Yang Qindong's action made Commander Tong Qiao, who was about to speak, swallow his words. Compared to the other guards, the Hangzhou City Guard was slightly higher. He had long heard of the Duke of Loyalty and Courage. He had heard that not long ago, Baiming's Minister of Justice, Yu Shuriwei, had been dragged down by this person and his entire clan had been implicated. Such a ruthless person was not someone a rank 3 general could afford to offend. Guaning, on the other hand, took a step forward when the atmosphere in the hall suddenly became heavy. When no one spoke, his expression didn't change. Duke of Loyalty and Courage? What are you doing? Please understand the situation. This is the Southern Ming Dynasty's Hangzhou, not Baiming's capital. It is also not your Yang family village or Chang family villa. Lord Qi is the prefect of Hangzhou and a rank 4 official personally appointed by the emperor. He is. This duke did not say that I wanted to kill him, but his younger cousin wanted to plot against me. Fortunately, The mercenaries reacted quickly and did not let the other party succeed. However, because of this he lost an arm. Qi Qing must give an explanation for this matter. Tiger's Mane, take the thing out. Yang Chendong signaled to Tiger's Mane behind him as he spoke. Tiger's Mane nodded and placed the severed arm on the table. The entire arm was still slightly black, and at the same time, it could be seen that the camouflage uniform was wrapped around the arm. When he saw this, Kuang Yi, who had been silent all this while, finally had a change in expression. He suddenly thought of something and couldn't sit still anymore. He stood up and asked, Duke Xiongdan, is that brother's life in danger? His life is not in danger, but his entire right arm is completely gone. Yang Chendong faced Kuang Yi. When he said these words, his voice was clearly suppressed. It's good that he is fine. When Kuang Yi heard that the mercenaries' lives were not in danger, he could not help but let out a long sigh of relief. This time he had only left the capital to do two things. First, it was official business. That was to patrol the various guard stations in the south. This was so that when they really needed an army, they would be able to pull them out and have enough fighting power. The second matter was the secret edict that the emperor had just issued. It was to persuade Yang Chendong to let the mercenaries behind him work for him. At this moment, if the mercenary brothers were to lose their lives, it would be even more difficult to discuss the cooperation. Fortunately, he had only lost an arm, so he was still safe. This way he could be at ease. Of course, this kind of relief was only in his heart. Seeing Yang Chendong appear with a murderous aura and take out a broken arm, he knew that if he did not give an explanation, not to mention the anger of the Duke of Loyalty, at the very least, there was no need to discuss the matter of cooperation. As the Minister of War and an important official of the Imperial Court, Kuang Yi had seen a lot of storms and reacted quickly. After figuring out the key point, his expression changed immediately. Magistrate Qi, what is going on? All of a sudden, he changed the topic and asked Qi Bushen. Many people were stunned on the spot. With such a change in attitude, many people who thought they were smart instantly understood what was going on. Minister Kuang had questioned Qi Bushen for the sake of the Duke of Loyalty. Even though he knew that Qi Bushen had the background of the Minister of Rights, Lu De, he still did it without hesitation. It seemed that the rumors were true. Kuang Yi owed the Duke of Loyalty a life-saving grace and was now repaying him. Qi Bushen also thought the same. He looked at Kuang Yi with a bitter expression and said, Lord Kuang, I really don't know what happened. Why would the Duke of Loyalty question me like this? Could it be a misunderstanding? Misunderstanding? Do you know who the Duke of Loyalty is? How could he misunderstand you? Since you don't know, why don't you ask your cousin to come out and explain it to us face to face? Kuang Yi didn't look at other people's expressions and didn't have time to figure out what they were thinking. He only knew that a mercenary was injured in front of him. If he couldn't give a suitable explanation, it would be impossible for him to cooperate with the other party. For the sake of the country, for the peace of the South, and for the South Ming to have the capital to contend with Baiming, not to mention a fourth-rank magistrate, even if Minister Lu De was here, he would sacrifice himself when necessary. Perhaps no one except Yang Chendong could understand Kuang Yi's thoughts at this moment. Qi Bushen didn't understand, so he was a little conflicted about calling his cousin out. But in front of Shangguan he couldn't say anything to refuse. He just stood there and didn't say anything. He just wanted to use this method to resist. Once Kuang Yi's anger dissipated, perhaps there would be a chance to save the situation. Qi Bushen thought himself clever and didn't say a word. Yang Chendong saw through his thoughts and smiled coldly. Oh, it seems that I've made a mistake. Since that's the case, I'll take my leave. Sorry for the disturbance, ha ha ha. After saying this with a faint smile, Yang Chendong prepared to turn and leave. However, before he could take a step, Kuang Yi's voice rang out. Qi Bushen, I told you to find my cousin, but you didn't hear me. Guaning, bring some men to the back residence and find him. Kuang Yi actually ordered a search of the residence. This was tantamount to falling out completely. Although it didn't matter if he offended a small fry like Qi Bushen, what would the Minister of Rights Lu De think? How would he deal with him when they met in the imperial court? Not to mention, the two of them had a good personal relationship. Why would he do this? Wouldn't there be no room for negotiation? At this moment, Tong Qiao, the commander of the Hangzhou city guards, and Guanning were stunned. Even the prefectural magistrate, Qi Bushen, was shocked. Only Yang Chendong stood there with a faint smile on his face. He already had a plan for what he would face today. From the looks of it now, everything that had developed was going according to his imagination. It seemed that the Southern Ming Empire had indeed encountered a big problem this time. The other party's intention to invite him and the mercenaries to come out of seclusion was obvious. Lu Ping's right arm was completely crippled. It was impossible to say that Yang Chendong wasn't angry. However, if he wanted to take revenge, there were many ways. For example, he could secretly kidnap Lu Ping, or let the members of the Cold Blade Division pretend to be bandits and rush into the Qi residence to kidnap Lu Ping. No matter which method it was far better than openly denouncing him like this. However, he didn't have a choice. He wanted to see how Kuang Yi would deal with it, and where his bottom line was. Only by probing him would he be able to make more practical demands in the negotiation process to satisfy Yang Xie's development. Kuang Yi's performance didn't disappoint Yang Chendong. At least he knew that the other party was sincere. Since this was the case, many things would be much easier to handle. Guanning, who was called out, didn't understand why Minister Kuang Yi was so angry. However, since it was an order, as a subordinate, he had to obey. Immediately, he pointed at a few of his guards and led them to the backyard of the Qi residence. During this process, Qi Bushen really wanted to step forward and stop them, but when he saw the dark expression on Kuang Yi's face, Tong Qiao staring at him, and Yang Chendong standing there calmly, he didn't do anything to stop them. He had just tricked Tong Qiao and almost caused him to lose his official position. He must be holding a grudge in his heart. If he dared to openly disobey Kuang Yi's orders, Tong Qiao would be the first to jump out and teach him a lesson. It was also equivalent to performing well. The situation was stronger than the person. Not to mention the Duke of Loyal Courage, who was staring at him like a tiger watching its prey. That person had a flintlock in his hand. It was said that when he was angry, he even dealt with the Minister of Justice of the Northern Ming dynasty. Moreover, the Minister of Justice was the trusted aide of the Emperor. He was just a magistrate. How could he withstand it? Qi Bushen stood there tactfully and didn't speak. Time passed quietly like this. After a while, a roaring voice came from the backyard. What are you doing? Who are you? Let me tell you, this is the Qi residence. I want to see my cousin. I want to see the magistrate. Don't shout or I will teach you a lesson. As for the person you want to see, you will see him soon. Guanying's voice came from afar. Then Qi Qing, who was tied up, appeared in the front yard in front of everyone's eyes. Qi Qing's hair was disheveled, and there was an obvious footprint on his chest. It was obvious that he had been kicked when he resisted just now. Normally, he wouldn't even dare to imagine such a thing. His cousin was the magistrate of Hangzhou. As the saying goes, even if you don't respect the monk, you still have to respect the Buddha. Who in Hangzhou would dare to treat him like this? But today such a scene actually happened. He couldn't help but feel as if he was in a dream. When he entered the front yard and saw Qi Bushen, Qi Qing, who was known as the Hangzhou Divine Fist, cried bitterly and shouted as if he had been greatly wronged. Cousin, save me, save me. Don't panic. I am the magistrate. I won't let anyone wrong you. At this moment, Qi Bushen had returned to his original official appearance. He finally understood what was going on. If he really allowed someone to take Qi Qing away in front of him, he wouldn't be able to keep his position as the magistrate anymore. If he couldn't even protect his family, who would be loyal to him? A person's life was just a thin layer of skin. For this face, even if he had to face Kuang Yi, the minister, he had to do it. Presumably, once this matter spread out, his brother-in-law, Lu De, who was in the capital of Nanjing, would understand what he was doing now. Chapter 344. After comforting his cousin, Qi Bushen walked up to Yang Chendong and said, Duke Zhongdan, this is my Qi mansion. What are you trying to do? Bang. He was answered by a loud gunshot. It was just a gunshot, But it was so loud and sudden that it was completely out of Qi Bushen's expectations. He instinctively took 2 steps back, as if he was really afraid of being hit by the gun. Ha! Yang Chendong laughed heartily when he saw that Qi Bushen had been scared away by his spear. His gaze then landed on Qi Qing, who had been brought out. He spat out 5 words in a cold voice. Bring him here. Among the mercenaries, a man whose expression had changed greatly was pushed out from the crowd. As soon as he appeared, he attracted everyone's attention, but he didn't have any self-awareness. He didn't even look at anyone. He just pointed at Qi Qing and said, "It's him." He teamed up with the second brother of the Blackwater gang, Wu Yong. He wanted to get close to the loyal duke and assassinate him. All of this was arranged by him. I was just following orders. The man who stood out was one of the 2 followers sent by Qi Qing. As for why he was the only one left, it was naturally because the other person had been killed because he refused to cooperate. This scene had happened right before his eyes. In order to save his own life, he would naturally say whatever Yang Wu wanted him to say at this moment. The sudden accusation made Qi Qing, who was being held down, change his expression greatly, and he was even more confused. Only Wu Yong and himself knew about this matter. Unless it was the other party's testimony, he would not believe anyone else's words. At this moment he kept denying it. No. It's not like this. It's not like this. He wronged me. As far as Yang Chendong was concerned, Lu Ping's broken arm must be avenged. The accusation was just a formality. Even if there was no such accusation, would he let Qi Qing off? The answer was of course impossible. Since that was the case, why would he be polite? As if he did not hear Qi Qing's shouts, he looked at Kuang Yi and said, "Sir Kuang, the witness is here. Can I take him away?" Kuang Ye's expression was a little unnatural. Naturally, he could tell that it was a little far-fetched to want to pin Qi Qing down with just one witness. However, he also knew that if he didn't vent his anger, the so-called cooperation with the mercenaries would be impossible. For the bigger picture and for the country, sacrifice was a must. He immediately nodded. "Yes, there is a witness here. Duke of Loyalty, you can take Qi Qing away for questioning, but how to deal with him will be handed over to the Yamen or the Ministry of Justice." Kuang Yi agreed to Yang Chendong's request to take him away, but at the same time, he also left some leeway. Naturally, he didn't want to offend the mercenaries, but he also didn't want to offend Luda. At the very least, before he received the benefits from Yang Chendong, he would not easily make preparations to side with one side. When Qi Bushen heard Kuang Yi say that he could take them away, he wanted to refute. However, when he heard the last sentence, he quickly shut his mouth. Minister Kuang had left him some face. As long as Qi Qing's matter was handed over to the Yamen or the Ministry of Justice, he believed that with his connections, Qi Bushen would definitely be able to protect him. Qi Bushen was happy, and so was Yang Chendong. After laughing a few times, he took 2 big steps forward and whispered something in Kuang Ye's ear. With this sentence, Kuang Ye's originally very serious face instantly became much better. Just as Kuang Ye's expression became better, and Qi Bushen felt that something was wrong, a gunshot rang out again. Bang! The sound reverberated throughout the front yard. As the gunshot rang out, a bloody hole appeared on Qi Qing's forehead. Then his eyes became blurry, and he fell to the ground with a plop. At this moment, he couldn't be more dead. Yang Chendong was the one who fired the shot. Just as Kuang Ye's expression became happy, he had already fired the shot. While everyone was still in shock over this sudden turn of events, he had already put away his Type 54 pistol, turned around, and walked out of the Qi Mansion's main gate. As he walked, his voice could be heard. "I'm really sorry. It went off by accident." Huh? Yang Chendong left just like that. He had suddenly barged in, arrested, and killed someone. It seemed that this series of events had been premeditated, and had caught everyone off guard. Qi Bushen was stunned for a full 2 breaths. Suddenly, his eyes burned with anger as he looked at Yang Chendong's departing back. He shouted loudly, "Men, arrest this murderer for this official. Let's see who dares." Almost as soon as Qi Bushen's voice fell, Kuang Ye's voice also rang out. The Qi Mansion's guards, who were about to make a move, were stunned when they heard Minister Kuang's words. Then, before they could react, Guanning had already led a group of men to block the Qi mansion's gate to the outside world. Their actions seemed to be saying that no one could leave at will without Minister Kuang's order. Kuang Yi, what are you doing? Qi Bushen, who was burning with anger, had lost his composure at this time. In his anger, he actually shouted Minister Kuang's full name. However, Kuang Yi was not angry about this. He could understand Qi Bushen's feelings at this moment, and even understand the anger in his heart. However, if he had a choice, he would still let Yang Qindong go. All of this was not only because the other party had saved his life, but also because of a more important point. Earlier, the Duke of Loyalty had clearly said to him, "We can discuss the matter of hiring mercenaries. You can come to the mansion tomorrow to have a chat." Kuang Yi could finally let go of the stone that had been hanging high in his heart. At this time, how could he allow anything to happen to Yang Qindong? Not to mention that the one who died was Qi Qing. Even if Qi Bushen was killed by Yang Qindong, he would not arrest him on the spot. Instead, he would send someone to report the matter to Ingzong before making a decision. After all, everything was for the sake of the big picture. For the sake of the big picture, it was worth it to make some sacrifices. Seeing that Qi Bushen had shouted his full name, Kuang Yi gently shook his head. "Magistrate Qi, have a good night's rest. When your emotions have stabilized, we can talk again. As for what happened today, I will personally write a letter to Minister Liu and tell him the whole story." After saying this, Kuang Yi turned to the Hangzhou City Guard Commander Tong Qiao, who seemed to be scared silly, and said, "You stay and comfort Magistrate Liu. Before this matter is settled, the people of the Qi mansion should not go out casually." This meant that he wanted to keep an eye on Qi Bushen. After understanding this, Tong Qiao immediately nodded and said respectfully, "Please rest assured, Your Excellency." Yang Qindong and Kuang Yi left, leaving Qi Qing's body on the ground and the Hangzhou City Magistrate Qi Bushen, who was in pain. The Qi mansion's courtyard was impenetrable from the inside to the outside. Not even a bird could come out. This was the effect of power. The fist was the absolute truth. Yang Qindong and the others left the Qi mansion. Tiger's Mane was carefully observing the surrounding movements, especially behind him. Beta Persei had taken the initiative to take over the task. Together with Battalion Commander Wu Sheng, they loaded their guns and waited for a possible counterattack. Everyone rest assured. As long as they are not stupid, no one will come looking for trouble. Let's go back to the courtyard and have a good rest. I'm afraid we have something to discuss tomorrow. Yang Qindong stretched and entered the iconic luxurious carriage. Not long after, the sound of snoring could be heard from the carriage. Just as Yang Qindong had said, the next morning, just after breakfast, Kuang Yi brought Guanning to the Chang family's courtyard for the second time. Kuang Ye's impatience was not in line with the style of discussing important matters. Based on experience, the person who lost their cool first would be the one who would pay the most in the negotiation. Yang Qindong could understand Kuang Ye's desire to hire the mercenaries for help, but he did not expect him to be so impatient. When the two of them sat down, Kuang Yi said, "Zhu Huichen's matter has blown up. Jiaozhi has sent troops." Smart people understood what was going on. Yang Qindong was startled when he heard this. Then he nodded with a serious expression. "I see. Since that's the case, let's get straight to the point. I can talk to the mercenaries, but the imperial court must give you generous conditions. Also, you need to talk to the Daizong. To be honest, my two wives have many properties in the capital in the north. If the arrangements there are not clear, I won't help either." The imperial court of the southern Ming dynasty was well aware of the Daizong's attitude toward Yang Qindong. It was truly a case of using and guarding. Otherwise, Yang Qindong would not be unable to bring his family back when he wanted to go back to his hometown to pay respects to his ancestors. If the southern Ming dynasty wanted Yang Qindong to help, they had to get Bai Ming's permission. Kuang Yi had thought about this very clearly last night. Therefore, when Yang Qindong made the request, he readily agreed. "Duke of Loyalty, please rest assured. Since you want to help us, how can we let you worry about trivial matters? We will communicate with King Yu, but I'll have to trouble you to talk to the mercenaries first. After all, war waits for no one." Well said, well said. Since that's the case, let's work together. Yang Chendong nodded. Originally, negotiations were a very taxing matter, but because of Yang Chendong's magnanimity, it didn't even take an hour before Kuang Yi left. Of course, the main reason why Yang Chendong did not make things difficult for Kuang Yi was because of the Jiaoji army. Yang Chendong's dream was to realize the great Han dynasty's unification of the world. In order to achieve this goal, any foreign race would inevitably become his imaginary enemy. In the future, he could either conquer them or submit to them. Under such circumstances, how could he allow someone to invade the territory of the Han and ride on their heads? If Kuang Yi knew of Yang Chendong's ambitions, he would probably be willing to pay even less for this negotiation. He did not know that Yang Chendong had never been soft-hearted when it came to foreign invasions. Even if he was not invited, he would find a way to stand out and help. Chapter 345. Nanjing. As the supporting capital of Great Ming, it was the earliest capital of Great Ming. Because of Tu Mu's defeat, Zhu Qizhen of Ying sect came here and built a new capital here. Speaking of which, Zhu Qizhen was the most special emperor of the Ming dynasty. He had set 3 records in his life. Firstly, he was the only emperor of the Ming dynasty who had been captured. In this life, due to Yang Chendong, he was lucky not to be captured. Secondly, he was the only emperor of the Ming dynasty. Daizong Zhu Qiyu now addressed him as such. Thirdly, he was the only emperor of the Ming dynasty who had ascended the throne twice. When the South Ming was built, he still called himself Yingzong. He held another ascension ceremony and promoted officials. Furthermore, these records did not show that he was a great emperor. History didn't have a high opinion of him either. The process of being defeated, captured, lost his position, and restored just happened to prove that his fate was bumpy. It was because of such experiences that Zhu Qizhen wanted to do something more than any other emperor to prove his ability. With that, after establishing the South Ming, he had turned over a new leaf. He gave up on eating and playing and focused all his energy on ruling the country. His dream was to unify the great Ming dynasty one day, and return to the throne of the emperor in the capital of the north. Unfortunately, the heavens did not seem to have played with him enough. No matter how hard he worked, the problems that should have appeared were not small. On the contrary, they were getting worse and worse. Just as Zhu Qizhen was developing the military and land, the chaos in the south still appeared. Not only that, the scale was even larger than in history, and even Jiaoji sent out troops. During the Yongle period, Zhu Di had conquered Jiaoji, present-day Vietnam. At that time, the one leading the troops was the late Duking Zhongfu. With the strength of the Ming army, they defeated them and established Jiaoji province. However, as the journey was too far, there were many things that could not be done. In 1431 AD, Jiaoji province was removed, and Li Li accepted the title of Ming dynasty and became the Anan king. This was a huge blow to the prestige of the central government toward the southwest chieftains. Following which, Shi Duo proved that the negative effects of Xuanda abandoning Jiaoji were long-term and fatal. This incident dealt a heavy blow to the Ming dynasty's international reputation in the western region, and shook the Ming dynasty's suzerain status. Losing Anan meant losing the west. This was something that Zhu Zhangji probably did not expect. From then on, Anan continued to disturb the border and invade the land. This time, Minzhuang King Huading took the initiative to find Li Li King, who was old but still had great ambitions. After promising him great benefits, they who were already restless finally moved out. Once Jiaoji enters the war, the Yunnan affair will only get bigger and bigger. Moreover, the chaos in Guangdong seems to be mutual, so the rear is bound to be in chaos. How was he going to make Zhu Qizhen focus on developing the nation's power and plotting Beiming to unify the country? Chaos meant that more people would suffer. Chaos meant that the emperor's imperial power would be shaken, which would inevitably be tainted by historians. Chaos meant that a rebellion would need to be quelled, which meant that a lot of money would have to be spent, and a lot of troops would have to be mobilized. All of these were things that Zhu Qizhen didn't want to see, so he naturally had a headache because of this. At this time, Empress Qian suddenly suggested asking the Duke of Loyalty for help during the banquet. In her words, since this young Duke of Loyalty could even force back the elite Walla army, he should be able to solve the chaos in the south. Empress Qian said this because she heard the words of the eunuch beside her. However, no matter who she heard it from, she felt that it made sense and said it. This was exactly what Zhu Qizhan wanted. Zhu Qizhan, who was familiar with history books, had seen the deeds of many wise emperors. He found that they all had a common characteristic, which was that they knew how to use people and were good at using capable people. Without a doubt, Yang Chendong was a capable person. Other than his age being too young, whether it was his experience, background, or what he had done, it all proved that he was a useful talent. Such a great talent, but he couldn't be used by the southern Ming dynasty, which made him vexed. Fortunately, Prince Cheng Zhu Qiyu didn't seem to know how to use people. At least when it came to Yang Chendong, he didn't use the method of using him. Instead, he kept on guard until everyone in the world could see his intentions. This gave Zhu Qizhan a glimmer of hope. It could be said that the heavens were helping him. During the chaos in the south, the Duke of Loyalty, Yang Chendong, had to leave the capital to avoid the limelight because he overthrew the Minister of Justice, Yu Shiyue. At this moment, he was in his own territory. How could he let go of such a heaven-sent opportunity? He immediately sent someone to inform the Minister of War, Kuang Yi, who was patrolling the various military guard stations, that he had to use Yang Chendong no matter what. As long as the other party's conditions were not too excessive, he could agree to them one by one. This led to the meeting between Kuang Yi and Yang Chendong in Hangzhou. Now, Minister Cheng had reported the details of his meeting with Yang Chendong, as well as the conditions that Yang Chendong had proposed. After Zhu Qizhan read it carefully twice, he had an idea. He called the Minister of Personnel, Chen Sun, Minister of Revenue, Wang Zhua, Minister of Rights, Minister of Justice, Xiao Chua, Minister of Works, Shang Lu, and other important officials to the front of the palace for questioning. The ministers and important officials knelt first. After they rose, Zhu Qizhan said in a somewhat impatient voice, "Everyone, I wish to use Yang Chendong, the Duke of Loyalty, as a general to quell the chaos in the south. What do you all think?" There was no such thing as an airtight pants in the world, especially in the palace. Often, even a trivial matter would be infinitely magnified in the eyes of the officials. Needless to say, Kuang Yi had sent back a letter. It had passed through the hands of a few people to reach Zhu Qizhan. This news had long been leaked by outsiders. As officials favored by the emperor and relied on as important officials, which one of them had not experienced the ups and downs of the official world for decades. They had the ability to see through people's hearts. This time, the emperor had issued an edict, so they had gone through a lot on the way here. Now that they were asked by Zhu Qizhan, they all spoke in unison. "Your Majesty is wise." Seeing that no official came forward to stop him, Zhu Qizhan was overjoyed. He looked at the Minister of Rights, Lu De, and said, "Minister Lu, the Duke of Loyalty has made a request. He can lead the troops, but he needs Prince Cheng's approval. I want to let the Ministry of Rights do the work. How about it?" This official obeys. Lu De held the ceremonial tablet and walked out of the room. "Good. But who does Minister Lu want to send?" Zhu Qizhan nodded with satisfaction. He already knew that Lu De's brother-in-law had been humiliated by Yang Chendong in Hangzhou. However, his thoughts were the same as Minister Kuang Ye's. As an emperor, he only cared about the overall situation, and would not take such a small matter to heart. At most, he would give Qi Bushen an official position later. Lu De did not know what Zhu Qizhan was thinking, but at this moment he said with a serious face, "Your Majesty, since it is such a big matter, this official thinks that we should send Assistant Minister Yang. This will make it more serious." The so-called Assistant Minister Yang was the left Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Rights, Yang Shan. Speaking of which, Yang Shan was one of the 9 officials saved by Yang Chendong. His original position was the left Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Rights. After he followed Yingzong to Nanjing, his position was restored and he was still the left Assistant Minister. Yang Shan used to be an official in the northern capital, so he knew the situation there very well. He was also a rank 3 official. Even if he went to the northern capital, he would have a high rank. It could be said that Lu Da's arrangement was very suitable. Good. As per your request, let Yangshan go to Prince Cheng's place to talk. Zhu Qizhen nodded with satisfaction. This person was exactly what he wanted, so he immediately agreed. The conversation between the monarch and the official ended quickly. After Zhu Qizhen left for the harem, several important ministers left the hall in twos and threes, heading out of the palace. Minister of Works Jiang Yuan and Lu Da walked together. When he saw that there was no one around, he couldn't help but chuckle. Minister Lu, good method. Yangshan will be in trouble this time. Sigh, why did Lord Jiang say that? This old man is wholeheartedly working for the country. Lu Da's expression froze for a moment, then he shook his head and smiled. Clearly, he already knew that Jiang Yuan had seen through his little trick. Although it was a little trick, it was actually an overt scheme. As mentioned before, Lu Da was the only minister of the 6 ministries who was from Nanjing. Because of this, he was a little special. This caused many people to look at him with envy and a trace of jealousy. Naturally, there were people who were unhappy. Among those who were unhappy, the most important one was the left assistant minister of the Ministry of Rights, Yangshan. The left assistant minister was a rank 3 official, and was only one step away from being a minister. However, it was often this step that many people couldn't reach in their lifetime. Not only did this require the emperor's favor, experience, ability, popularity, and luck. Yangshan's luck seemed to be a bit worse. There was a Lu Da above him, and he was not much older than him. Under such circumstances, it would be extremely difficult for him to stand out. Because it was difficult, it was difficult. Difficult did not mean that there was no hope at all. For example, as long as Lu Da stepped down, his opportunity would naturally come. Because of this, whether Yangshan did it intentionally or not, it was very difficult for him to walk the same path as Lu Da. This caused the problem of internal consumption. Naturally, Lu Da had noticed this long ago. However, he also knew that this Yangshan was quite popular. In addition, he had walked out of the battlefield with Ying Zong. It seemed that compared to others, he had a bit more friendship. This kind of person was not someone he could suppress or deal with as he wished. It had to be said that Lu Da had some ability. He knew what the situation was, but he did not make it public. He just kept it in his heart and waited for the right opportunity to strike. Now, the opportunity had come. The emperor was going to send someone to Baiming to discuss some matters. Speaking of which, this was the first time that southern Baiming had come into contact with Baiming since it was established. Most likely no one was confident in this matter, so he gave this task to Yangshan. This seemed to be a matter of selecting talents, but wasn't it just making things difficult for him? This was because everyone could see that Zhu Qizhen did not want to pay too much, and wanted to get things done. This task was not easy for anyone else. Chapter 346. If things didn't go well, Yangshan might even be humiliated. At that time, he would be able to openly attack this person. Of course, there was another reason for sending Yang Chendong. It was to make things difficult for Yang Chendong. Didn't this person slap his wife's brother's face in Hang Province? Now he sent Yang Chendong, who had a relatively straightforward personality, to handle this matter. If this failed, Daizong, who was already a thorn in Emperor Daizong's side, would have an even harder time. This was also why Jiang Yuan said that he had some tricks up his sleeves. Regarding this, Lu Da did not explain. He only chuckled and let it go. Lu Da made his move and the job fell into Yangshan's hands. When the imperial edict was issued, he was in a difficult position at home. Normally, to become an official of the Ministry of Rights, one had a good temper and was eloquent. Yangshan was good at speaking, but his personality was a little too honest. To be specific, he was a little too frank. His personality was rare among diplomats, so it was easy for him to offend some people at work. Back then, it was thanks to Hu Zhao's appreciation and help that he was able to gain a foothold in the Ministry of Rights. This was also one of the reasons why Zhu Qizhen didn't promote him to Minister of Rights. Of course, Yangshan was quite capable, especially when it came to execution. It was because of this that he became the left assistant minister of the Ministry of Rights without too many people objecting. However, no matter how capable he was, this matter was difficult for him. Ingzong wanted to use the Duke of Loyalty and Courage to ask him to speak in front of Daizong. However, the imperial edict did not give him any authority. On the contrary, it implied that Ingzong was one level higher than Daizong. To be able to use his people was giving him face. This kind of condition was difficult for Yang Shan. This became an impossible mission. Unfortunately, Ingzong was too arrogant. Even if he went to speak, he wouldn't be able to make it clear. Instead, he would make the emperor unhappy. Yang Shan really wanted to ask the emperor for some conditions regarding this matter. Since he wanted the emperor's help, he couldn't use a commanding tone. He had to give him some benefits. Unfortunately, he probably wouldn't be able to see them because he had offended Chao Jixiang and Menda at work. Chao Jixiang was the head eunuch of Ingzong's side, the head eunuch of the ceremony directorate. His position was similar to Wang Zhen. Once, because the eunuchs under his command acted irrationally, Chao Jixiang had censured them. Even if Chao Jixiang personally came out to intercede, it was useless. With this grudge, she naturally did not want to see the emperor at this critical moment. Menda, the commander of the embroidered uniform guard. He was also one of the important officials that Ingzong trusted, and was in charge of the security of the imperial palace. This person also had a relative who wanted to enter the Ministry of Rights through Yang Shan's connections, but was rejected at the door. Because of this, he was filled with hatred. Both ministers had been offended, and he had not received an imperial edict from the emperor to meet him. How difficult would it be to enter the palace to meet the emperor? At this moment, Yang Shan realized that he was actually quite a failure as a person. At this critical moment, no one was willing to speak up for him. Could it be that the heavens wanted the Yang family to die? Once the imperial edict was issued, there was no room for negotiation. Lu De even requested for him to leave the capital within 24 hours, which was 2 days. He said that the matter of the Duke of Loyalty and Courage was very urgent, and could not be delayed. With the imperial edict and the pressure of the officials, Yang Shan was unyielding and did not beg anyone. Within 24 hours of receiving the imperial edict, which was the morning of the second day, he left the capital. Although he knew that this mission would be very difficult to complete, if he did not go, the Yang family would also be unlucky. Using himself to exchange for the safety of his family, no matter how he looked at it, it was worth it. When Yang Shan left, he did not even say goodbye to anyone. He just took the corresponding document that could prove his identity and left. Naturally, no one thought highly of him when he left this time. Even the entire Yang residence was filled with the sound of crying. It was as if they knew that the chances of their master going this time were slim. Even if Daizong did not kill him, if he could not complete the mission, Ingzong would not spare him when he returned. This was because of the last time when he left the capital, there was someone behind him who made King Yu the emperor. Since coming to the capital, Zhu Qizhen had been more careful. For example, he was more cautious about the ability of his subordinates to manage them. For a third-rank official like Yang Shan in the capital, there were naturally hidden sentries of the embroidered uniform guards around the residence. Normally, they would keep an eye on everything here. Once they discovered any abnormal movements, they would immediately respond to them. But now that Yang Shan had left from outside, there were sorrowful cries coming from the residents every day. This made the embroidered uniform guards who were in charge of monitoring feel sympathetic and relax their guard. Even when they saw an opera troupe enter the Yang residence, they did not do much inspection. The opera troupe performed for 3 days before it ended. Even if the opera troupe was closed, there would still be cries coming from time to time. Yang Shan brought the relevant documents to prove his identity from Nanjing. He traveled through wind and rain all the way. It took him only 8 days to cover a distance of nearly 1,200 kilometers. It was nearly 300 kilometers in a day. Even with his body, it was unbearable. But Yang Shan had no other choice, because he was worried that if he was negligent, he would be charged with another crime. If that happened, all his hard work would be for naught. For the sake of his family, he had no choice but to rush along. In his grief and indignation, by the time he reached the capital, he had fallen ill. The capital had already received news of Yang Shan's arrival. And with the exaggeration of Lu De and the others, the purpose of his arrival was already known in advance. In the throne room of the imperial palace, Zhu Qiyu had already pushed away all the things on the dragon table in anger. At this time, his chest was still panting heavily. It was obvious that he was very angry. It was no wonder. Lu De had spread the news that Yang Shan came to the capital as the representative of Yingzong Zhu Qizhen to reprimand Zhu Qiyu. Having no monarch, father, brothers, and ministers were the four major crimes. It was to show the righteousness of the southern Ming, and to show that the southern Ming was the legitimate identity. As for speaking up for Yang Qindong, it was just a matter of convenience. It gave people the feeling that the person who Baiming was giving face to Prince Cheng. When the news first came, Zhu Qiyu had already lost his temper in the imperial palace. It was said that a blind eunuch was even kicked twice because of this. This was the second time he had lost his temper in the main hall. Relatively speaking, this was more of an act for the officials to see. At the same time, it was also a kind of test. To be able to enter this palace, which one of them wasn't a shrewd old thing. At this time, all of them had their heads lowered. When they raised their heads, their eyes were filled with anger. They expressed their dissatisfaction with Baiming, dissatisfaction with Yingzong Zhu Qizhen, and their support for Zhu Qiyu, as well as their determination to stand together. After all, Yingzong was once their master. The ancients said that loyal officials did not serve two masters. The fact that everyone was still standing here meant that they had already lost their position as officials. At this time, it was naturally not good for them to criticize anyone. Otherwise, if this spread out, it would be detrimental to their reputation. The officials of ancient times still regarded their reputation as extremely important. At least on the surface, they did things very well. It was because of this that even though they knew that Yingzong had gone overboard, none of the officials stood out to say anything. Everyone's silence was perhaps the main reason why Zhu Qiyu lost his temper for the second time. Zhu Qiyu himself was the clearest about the process of ascending to the throne. It was an extraordinary act in extraordinary times. It was because of this that he was even more worried that things would repeat themselves. If these officials overthrew him like how they had pushed him to become the emperor, what should he do? At that time, it might be impossible for him to return to being Prince Cheng. He was afraid, so he needed his officials to express their loyalty. Only then could he feel more at ease. Otherwise, if there was really a day when he went up against Zhu Qizhen, who knew if there would be someone behind him who would stab him in the back? One side was probing, while the other side was thinking about their own reputation. This formed a kind of invisible confrontation, just like now. No one spoke, and an awkward atmosphere naturally arose. What? Don't you have anything to say? The atmosphere in the throne room was very quiet. Finally, the young Zhu Qiyu, who was wearing an imperial robe with a golden dragon, could not hold himself back and took the initiative to speak. However, there was a trace of anger in his voice. The emperor was angry, and the officials were nervous. However, they were only nervous. It was not to the extent of being afraid. This time, it was not just one person who did not express their opinion. Instead, all the smart people did so. With the mentality that the law could not punish the majority, what was there to be afraid of? This was the so-called, the law could not punish the majority. Even if you were the emperor, there was nothing you could do if the people below didn't say anything. Some people would say, "Isn't the emperor the most powerful? If they don't listen, you can just kill them." However, if you really did this, all the officials would be in danger. Who would dare to work for you? Your country would naturally be unstable. After questioning, there was still no one speaking. The angry Zhu Qiyu decided to call out names. He wanted to force everyone to express their opinions. Although this method would lose the emperor's face, in order to stabilize his position, he could not care less. His gaze swept over the officials. The first person he saw was the Minister of Rights, Hu Xiao. Speaking of which, Hu Xiao was the oldest among the officials. He had also been an official for the longest time. He had served many emperors of the Great Ming Dynasty. At the same time, as the Minister of Rights, his attitude was extremely important. Zhu Qiyu looked at Hu Xiao and said, "Beloved official Hu, why don't you speak first? What is the difference between the Southern and Beiming dynasties? Who is the true orthodox?" Suddenly being called out, Hu Xiao, who was holding a ceremonial tablet and wearing official robes, trembled slightly. There was a struggle and hesitation on his face, but he did not know what to say. Chapter 347. He had long received the news that Yang Shan had come to the capital as the representative of the Ying sect. He was even one step ahead of the imperial court and knew more inside information. But it was precisely because of this that he was in a difficult position. He did not even accept the suggestion given to him by a certain person. In his view, if he did that, he could not be called a truly loyal official. Perhaps his existence would be tarnished in the history books. The moment he decided not to accept that person's suggestion, Hu Xiao was already prepared to be struck by the emperor's anger. However, even at this point, he was still unwilling. He was unwilling to be the first person to be called out. Zhu Qiyu asked bluntly. He chose Hu Xiao as his first target. The other courtiers held their breaths as they watched this scene with rapt attention. Everyone knew that the emperor was going to make an example out of someone. Unless you directly stated your position, there would not be a good result. But they did not know how Zhu Qiyu would deal with it. After all, Minister who was an old official of several dynasties. More importantly, he had a granddaughter. His son-in-law was the Duke of Loyalty and Courage. He was an outstanding person. Not long ago, he overthrew the Minister of Justice, Yu Shuriwe, in a fit of anger. He was also a person favored by the emperor, but he did not protect him. Such a Duke of Loyalty and Courage was not as simple as a title. He was a truly capable person. But the emperor still made an example out of Hu Xiao. It could be seen that this time he was serious. The other officials watched how Hu Xiao was going to answer himself, and how Zhu Qiyu was going to deal with it. They were also thinking about how to deal with it when they were called out next. Hu Xiao was still standing there in silence. From time to time, he recalled what a certain person had said to him. On the other hand, he was thinking about how the history books would evaluate him if he did that. As he struggled, time passed by. Zhu Qiyu on the dragon throne seemed to be a little impatient. Beloved official Hu, we are talking to you. Could it be that you are old and muddle-headed? Your Majesty, this official has something to say. Zhu Qiyu was clearly angry and even began to reprimand Hu Xiao. If he did not get the response he wanted, he would probably fly into a rage. It was possible that he would be removed from office and punished. One of the officials raised his head and took a step forward. The person who spoke was the newly appointed Minister of Justice, Su Yozhen, a second-rank official. Your Majesty, as the Son of Heaven, you are naturally the Son of Heaven. When you ascended the throne, you announced to the world that you are the ruler of this generation. Ever since you ascended to the throne, you stabilized the court, repelled the Walla, and defeated the Woku pirates. You brought peace to the Northern Territory, and these actions only serve to show that you are a true dragon, the Son of Heaven. On the other hand, the retired emperor who received the emperor's grace did not pursue the matter of Tuma's fiasco. After settling down in Nanjing, he did not achieve even an inch of merit. On the contrary, he caused the southern imperial families Wuxia and common people to rebel one after another, resulting in the common people having no way to make a living. With this kind of conduct, how could he face the common people of the world? At this time he actually sent someone to reprimand your Majesty. This is truly laughable, extremely laughable. After Su Yozhen finished speaking, she actually laughed 3 times in front of the court officials. However, these 3 sounds had their own reasons. The first laugh was because of the emperor's lack of self-confidence. Since he had already become the emperor, how could he be afraid of others saying that he was not the legitimate emperor? If he even cared about this point, then it could only prove one thing, and that was that he had preconceived that he was not the legitimate emperor. The second laugh was because of the reaction of the court officials. Normally, they would say how loyal they were to the emperor. However, when it came to the issue of reputation, they all wanted to be a good person. Then weren't they just deceiving themselves and others? The third laugh was because of themselves. The court officials could see that this matter was not easy to express. If they did not handle it well, they would be condemned in the history books. However, even though they knew this, they still stood up. They really had their own difficulties. The news from the Duke of Loyalty, Yang Chendong, arrived a bit earlier than the official news from the court. At the same time, a letter arrived. The letter explained in detail what might happen in the northern Ming dynasty, and what Su Yozhen should do if she was willing to do so. In the letter, Yang Chendong did not ask Su Yozhen to do anything. However, with this letter in hand, how could he dare to neglect it? On the surface, the relationship between the two was extremely bad. It could even be said that they were enemies. However, all of this was just a cover. Su Yozhen was able to become the head of the Ministry of Works from a small imperial censor. It was all the result of Yang Chendong's secret operations. If all of this was made public, with Zhu Qiyu's personality, he would definitely not forgive him. At that time, he would lose everything he had, even his life. He had to listen to Yang Chendong's orders. If he did as he was told, he would become an evil person who was not loyal to the emperor. How to choose was truly a difficult choice. Because of this difficult situation, when Zhu Qiyu called everyone into the hall, he did not immediately express his attitude. He was still thinking about whether or not he could muddle through. He did not expect that the emperor would call out Minister Hu Ming's name. At this moment, he was pushed into a very awkward situation. Hu Ming was the grandfather of Yang Chendong's legal wife, Hu Yan. At this moment, he was going to Jianing Prefecture to worship the ancestors. If he watched Hu Pa get into trouble and didn't save her, who knew what this young but bold loyal guild member would do? He was afraid that he would not have a good ending. If he stuck out his head, he would be stabbed. If he retracted his head, he would still be stabbed. However, if he stuck out his head, he would be able to live well. Not only would he be able to report to Yang Chendong, but he would also be able to express goodwill to the emperor. There was no need to hesitate about what to choose. Thus Su Yozhen stepped out. He used this method to raise Zhu Qiyu up high. At the same time, he also stepped on Zhu Qizhen, who he had previously called the emperor, and degraded him to be worthless. Perhaps some of Su Yozhen's words were true, while some were slightly exaggerated. But the most important thing was his attitude. He actually took that step and spoke badly of Yingzong in front of everyone. This was not something a loyal official should do. For a time, everyone looked at Su Yozhen with different expressions. Some were shocked, some were angry, some were shameless, some were disdainful, some were envious, and so on. No matter how others looked at Su Yozhen, Zhu Qiyu was happy at this moment. Originally, when he saw that everyone did not speak, he was angry. In order to prevent everyone from two-timing, he decided to call out their names one by one and force them to express their views. In Zhu Qiyu's view, if these officials did not express their views, then they were disloyal and even hoped that Zhu Qizhen would come back. If that was the case, then at that time, these people would become Yingzong's officials again and could continue to enjoy the glory and wealth. If that was really the case, one could imagine how many officials would be willing to fight to the death for Zhu Qizhen if there really came a day when they had to face him head-on. What were his chances of winning? Forced by this, he had to use this matter to force the officials to express their views. The reality was the same as the worst result he had imagined. Everyone was silent. On the surface, they looked like loyal officials, but in reality, they just wanted to benefit from both sides. In his anger, he wanted to make an example out of Hu Xiao. It was because this person was a powerful official with great influence that he became the monkey to warn the others. At this moment, Su Yozhen's sudden words eased the originally heavy atmosphere. It was as if he had seen the light in the dark night. Zhu Qiyu was happy. Beloved official Su understands the world. Your words are reasonable. Zhu Qiyu was so happy that he called out Su Yozhen's name twice. Lord Su's words are reasonable. You have spoken my thoughts. The head eunuch standing next to Zhu Qiyu, Jining, quickly supported Su Yozhen. Jining was different from the other important officials. As a eunuch, he had to rely on the emperor for what kind of life he could live. If something happened to Daizong, he would not benefit no matter what. Since that was the case, he had no choice but to walk down this path. However, the other officials did not speak. As a eunuch, if he took the lead to express his opinion, it would not be reasonable. That was why he had been suppressing himself and coldly watching the other officials' reactions. Now that Su Yozhen had stood up and said the words that Zhu Qiyu wanted to hear the most, he immediately made his position clear. Following Jin Ying's statement, the other officials also said in unison, "Lord Su's words are reasonable. You have spoken my thoughts." Good. The sudden change in the situation made Zhu Qiyu very happy. Although he knew that some people had to say something against their will because of the situation, no matter what, he had at least won this battle on the surface. And the key to this victory was Su Yozhen. Thinking that this person was so considerate of him, he was a true loyal official. The more he looked at him, the more pleasing he was to the eye. If it wasn't for the fact that he didn't want his table manners to be too unsightly, he was afraid that he would have added Su Yozhen as the grand tutor of the crown prince, which was equivalent to a first-class official. Official Su, hear the decree. I order you and the Ministry of Rights to be responsible for receiving Yangshan and raising the prestige of our country. Zhu Qiyu's voice rang out in the court. Su Yozhen knelt on the ground and gratefully accepted the decree. At this moment, he had no other way out. With what he had just said, if Ingzong really came back one day, he probably would not end well. In a sense, he was now a grasshopper on the same rope as Daizong. The small court meeting, which should have been very tense, ended. Zhu Qiyu left the hall with satisfaction, accompanied by eunuch Jining. Only then did the other officials walk out in twos and threes. However, it was clear that Su Yozhen, who was usually quite popular, had become a loner. It was as if he had contracted an infectious disease. People could not help but keep a respectful distance from him. Chapter 348. The Minister of Rights, Hu Xiao, pondered for a moment, then strode over to Su Yozhen's side. Many officials saw this, but they all had understanding expressions. After all, if Su Yozhen had not taken the initiative to stand up, Hu Xiao would not have been able to be an official of the same court as them. Minister Hu. After seeing Hu Xiao walk over, Su Yozhen's expression was respectful, and his head was slightly lowered. It was clear that this was not because Hu Xiao's status or position was higher than his, but because it was sincere respect from the bottom of his heart. Thank you, Minister Su. Hu Xiao smacked his lips. It seemed that it was difficult for him to say the word thank you. However, when he actually said it, he relaxed a lot. I don't dare. Su Yozhen hurriedly shook his head. This person was not as simple as an old official. His grandson-in-law was the Duke of Loyalty and Courage. Because of this, he had to be respectful, and he could only be respectful. There's nothing I wouldn't dare to do. If it weren't for Minister Su's help, I'm afraid I would have been kicked out of the imperial court by now. Hu Xiao also shook his head, looking as if he deserved the word thank you. Not at all. With the Duke of Loyalty and Courage, how could anything happen to Minister Hu? I'm sure that even if I didn't stand up, someone else would have. When Su Yozhen said this, he intentionally looked around. The more time he spent with Yang Qindong, the more he learned, the more he admired this person. Based on his intuition, the Duke of Loyalty and Courage would not only have one trump card. He should have prepared something else, but it was not the right time, so he would not reveal it. When he heard Su Yozhen mention Yang Qindong's name, a relaxed smile appeared on Hu Xiao's face. He was indeed satisfied with this grandson-in-law. Not only was he the grandson of an old friend, but his talent was also admirable. Now even he had to show his gratitude to him for protecting him. When he thought of this, how could he not be satisfied? However, before the smile could fully blossom on his face, he became a lot calmer. What he did this time is really too bold. Won't Yang Xijing Yangshan be implicated? How is he going to live in the future? Speaking of Yangshan's matter, Su Yozhen saw that no one was paying attention to him and whispered, Minister Hu, regarding this matter, the Duke of Loyalty and Courage has already made plans, but we still need your cooperation. When he heard the word cooperate, Hu Xiao instinctively wanted to shake his head and refuse. After all, he really didn't want to do something like scamming his good friend. But considering that even if he didn't show up, the matter would still be carried out, and his old friend might still suffer. He could only nod and agree. All right, then this old man will take a look at sieging with Lord Su. That would be great. Minister Hu, please. Su Yozhen felt relieved. If Hu Xiao was willing to step in, things would naturally be much easier to resolve. He would also have a much easier time completing the task given to him by Yang Qindong. At the relay station of the capital, Yang Shan, who had been here countless times, was now staying here. In the past, he had come here as the host to receive guests from all over the world. But now he had become an envoy and was living here. Just from this change in role, one could see Bai Ming's attitude towards him. He didn't treat him as a special envoy of the Shang Kingdom or a representative of the Ying sect, but as an envoy of the southern Ming Kingdom. Thinking of this, Yang Shan, who had already caught a cold from the bumpy journey, felt even worse. His body was becoming weaker and weaker. It was to the point that he couldn't even receive guests. But when a servant came to report that Minister Hu from the Ministry of Rites had arrived, Yang Shan still insisted on receiving him. He had great respect for Hu Xiao, and their relationship could be described as both a teacher and a friend. Not to mention, he had worked under this person for many years. Just based on this, how could he not receive his old superior when he came to see him? In the reception hall of the relay station, Yang Shan walked in with the help of a servant. He saw Hu Xiao, who had a peaceful expression and a concerned gaze. Beside him, a man wearing a third-rank official's robe was standing with his hands behind his back and looking at him. He knew this person. He used to be an imperial censor of the censorate. He seemed to be a 6th-rank or 5th-rank official. Who would have thought that in such a short time, he would be like him, a 3rd-rank official? Sighing in his heart, Yang Shan cupped his fists and said to Hu Xiao, "Minister, it's been a long time. Sieging, are you okay with your body?" Seeing that Yang Shan's complexion wasn't too good, Hu Xiao took a step forward and gently held his arm as he asked with concern. "Thank you for your concern, Minister. I'm fine. Cough, cough, cough." After coughing a few times, Yang Shan's face turned green. Take a seat. Hu Xiao couldn't bear to see him like this. He pulled Yang Shan's arm to a chair and slowly sat down. "Thank you for your concern, Minister." After sitting down, Yang Shan's breathing seemed to be smoother, and he spoke with more confidence. Only when he looked at Hu Xiao, his face was still full of hope. One could imagine how he was feeling at this moment. Ever since the Battle of Timu Castle, the two of them had not seen each other for nearly 2 years. Who would have thought that when they met again, they would be serving different masters? Speaking of serving different masters, Yang Shan couldn't help but think of his mission this time. The joy of meeting his old friend was diluted a lot at once. "Minister, I'm here with a mission this time, but I wonder what Prince Cheng's attitude is." "There's no Prince Cheng here. There's only the acting emperor." A voice suddenly sounded out. Needless to say, the person who spoke was naturally Su Yozhen, who had been silent all this time. Yang Shan's face turned ghastly pale when he heard that. Fortunately, Hu Xiao was here. He was the link between the two sides. Once the situation turned bad, he became a lubricant. Therefore, when he saw Yang Shan's expression, he immediately said, "Sieging, this is Lord Su Yozhen. He is now the left assistant minister of the Ministry of Works. He is also an important official who was personally appointed by the acting emperor to receive you. If you have anything to say, you can talk to him." Yang Shan, who was about to reprimand Su Yozhen, frowned when he heard this. Even though they were both 3rd-rank officials, one had to look at their seniority and authority. In terms of seniority, Zhang Xian was much stronger than the other party. How could he allow a junior to interfere in his conversation with the old minister? However, after this introduction, Yang Shan understood that if he wanted to complete the mission given by Ying Zong, Su Yozhen would not be able to bypass him. Even so, he politely cupped his fists and said, "So it's Minister Su. Greetings." "Assistant Minister Yang, there's no need to be so polite." Su Yozhen also bowed and said, "Since Minister Hu is here today, why don't we take this opportunity to talk things out and see if we can find a balance so that everyone can complete the Emperor's order earlier? Wouldn't that be wonderful?" Balance? Yang Shan shook his head after hearing this. Impossible. This is an impossible mission. How do you know it's impossible without trying? Su Yozhen raised his voice in response to Yang Shan's arbitrary judgment. How can there be a possibility? Isn't arranging for me to be at the relay station already enough to explain everything? Yang Shan replied Su Yozhen harshly. Hu Xiao was his superior, and his seniority was there for all to see. Of course he couldn't say anything. However, Su Yozhen was a rising star, so he could say whatever he wanted. Yang Shan actually saw through the hidden meaning behind arranging for him to be at the relay station. Su Yozhen smiled. He was a smart person and naturally liked to deal with smart people. Even so, there were some things that he could say. However, before he said it, he glanced at Hu Xiao, who was frowning, as if he had some scruples. Don't be fooled by the fact that Hu Mingzhu didn't say anything. He was very clear about the conversation between the two, and what they were going to say next. It was precisely because he was clear that he felt a little pained. On one side was the great Ming dynasty that he had been loyal to for almost his entire life. On the other side was the grandson-in-law that he was most satisfied with. It was difficult for him to choose which path to take. Of course, from the perspective of righteousness, he would definitely choose to be loyal to the great Ming dynasty without hesitation. However, if he did so, not only him, but his family and relatives would also be implicated. It was not impossible for his entire family to be executed. When he thought about how Daizong actually targeted him in the imperial court during the day, and did not care about the fact that he was an old official of several dynasties, did this not already explain a lot of problems? This kind of emperor already had doubts about him. Once he was suspicious, he was afraid that no matter what he did, he would not be able to regain the trust he had in the past. The emperor's distrust and the terrible consequences of revealing everything made Hu Zhao's original balance in his heart lose its original balance. When he noticed Su Yozhen's gaze staring at him, he finally made a decision. That was to not help either side and observe the situation first. Although he said that he would not help either side, from the fact that he knew some of the truth and did not report it, he had already begun to lean towards the loyal Duke Yang Qindong in his heart. You guys talk first, I'll go out to get some fresh air. Hu Xiao got up and casually found a reason to leave, leaving Yang Shan, who was sitting on the chair, feeling puzzled. However, before he could ask anything, Su Yozhen's voice sounded. Minister who is old, it's good to go out to get some fresh air. However, I don't know if official Yang also wants to go out to get some fresh air. You have to know that what I'm going to say next is very important. I'm afraid it will scare you. Chapter 349. Scare me. Originally, his attention was still on Hu Xiao, but because of Su Yozhen's words, he was really provoked. Let me tell you, official Su, I have been on the battlefield and have climbed out from piles of corpses. What kind of scene have I not seen? You want to scare me? I'm afraid you don't have that kind of ability. Good, very good. Su Yozhen clapped after hearing this and had a look of praise. But then his expression became more serious as he said, Yang Shan, do you know that there is no path in front of you? You are already on a path to death. A path to death? Yang Shan pretended not to understand, but in reality, he was very shocked. Some things were just things that he had thought in his heart and had not been finalized. But how did Su Yozhen know? He was just a newly appointed minister of justice. Although he had a high position, he was still a new official. He should not know so many secrets of the southern Ming dynasty. Seeing that Yang Shan still did not want to admit it, and did not want to face the truth, Su Yozhen knew that he had to expose some shocking information. He immediately said with a righteous expression, Official Yang, you are a 17-year-old student. After that, King Yan Zhu raised an army 1399 and started the Battle of Jingnan. Because you participated in the defense of the city, you were given a reward. In the first year of Yongle, you were changed to the Honglu Temple. The Honglu Temple was in charge of ceremonies and ceremonies. Although the position was small, you could often see the emperor. You had a great bearing, loud and clear voice, and always worked diligently. You were often noticed by Zhu Di and later became the right minister of the Honglu Temple. After Ming Renzong ascended the throne, you were promoted to the Honglu Temple. Not long after, you were promoted to the left assistant minister of the Ministry of Rites and also managed the Honglu Temple, right? Hearing Su Yozhen speak of his life like it was a family treasure, Yang Shan was not very surprised. Things like this could be found as long as one had the heart. Thus he nodded. That's right. You're right. Go on. Okay. Seeing that Yang Shan refused to give up, Su Yozhen decided not to hold back. She continued, in the Battle of the Tuma Fortress, you were lucky. You were saved by the Duke of Loyalty. Then, you went to Nanjing with Ingzong and created the situation of the Southern Ming Dynasty. Speaking of it this way, you can be considered an old official and an important official. However, when Ingzong established the Southern Ming Dynasty and rewarded the officials, you didn't get a share. On the contrary, you were still the left assistant minister of the Board of Rites. Do you know why that is? Without waiting for Yang Shan to explain, Su Yozhen had already answered for him. Official Yang, outsiders say that you are an upright and eloquent person. But in fact you have your own bottom line. Because of this bottom line, you didn't choose to become a river of mud like most officials. Instead, you fell in love with the lotus flower and used the method of growing out of the mud without being stained. It is also because you scrupulously abide by your own bottom line and are unwilling to use power for profit that Ingzong did not choose you as the minister of a department. The minister of a department not only needs to be able to do things, but also needs to know how to do things. However, you only know the former. As for the latter, because of your bottom line, you have offended many people. If Ingzong really handed the Ministry of Rites to you, I'm afraid it would quickly cause chaos. That would be the biggest mistake. Not to mention, because of your unnecessary straightforwardness, you have offended Ingzong's close officials, Chao Jixiang and Menda. Then, because of your ability, you have threatened your superior, Minister Lu De. Haha, after being an official for so many years, you can actually make enemies everywhere and force yourself into a dead end. To be honest, it is really admirable. Su Yozhen's words seemed to have come to an end, but it had already shocked Yang Shan quite a bit. After being an official for so many years, it wasn't that he had never thought about why he couldn't go further and become the minister of the Board of Rites from the left assistant minister. But every time, he was so close to succeeding. However, that position seemed so far away, yet so close at the same time. Every time he had hope, he would be met with disappointment. Finally, one day, Yang Shan thought it through. It was probably because of his bottom line that he wasn't willing to turn a blind eye to things that others didn't like. That was why he couldn't be handed over to him. However, even if he realized this point, it was easy to change mountains and rivers, but difficult to change one's nature. How could Yang Shan be so easily changed? It was just that this was something that he had thought about for many years. Now that Su Yozhen had so casually pointed it out, how could he not be surprised? What made him even more shocked was that the other party knew about his relationship with Lu De, Chao Jixiang, and Menda. This kind of thing wasn't something that could be understood just because someone wanted to. That person had to be very familiar with him. Could it be that this Su Yozhen had long noticed him, and even collected information about him from various sources? The shock in his eyes lasted for a while. Then Yang Shan painfully shook his head. Right now, it wasn't the time to think about how the other party knew about this. Instead, he was thinking about what he should do next. Was it really like the other party said? Was he really at a dead end? What's wrong? Why aren't you saying anything? Su Yozhen had a premonition when she saw the shock in Yang Shan's eyes, followed by an indifferent attitude. She questioned Yang Shan. What are you doing? What do you want me to say? Didn't you say that I'm at a dead end? Yang Shan shook his head and looked as if he had lost his soul. His heart was filled with darkness. He thought about how he had sacrificed his youth and half of his life for the great Ming dynasty. He didn't know how many times he had risked his life, but in the end he still couldn't avoid his family being destroyed. How could he not be disappointed? Yang Shan's disappointed expression fell completely into Su Yozhen's eyes. He knew that there were some things that could be said. Everything had gone smoother than he had imagined. He originally thought that Yang Shan would still be stubborn for a while, and would only pick a time to say the following words. However, Now that Yangshan had thought through everything and was even disheartened, it was time for him to reveal his trump card. Sir Yang, there's indeed no way forward, but why don't you think of taking a step back? As the saying goes, take a step back and you will be able to see the world. Take a step back? For a moment, Yangshan was also a little confused by Su Yozhen's words. However, when he understood the general meaning of the other party's words, he shook his head again. There's no way back. If I can't complete this mission, even if I can return to the capital of Nanjing, those people will not let me go. Even Ingzong will not let me go. I'm afraid that even my family will be implicated. When he talked about his family, Yangshan's expression clearly showed a little more warmth, but it was only for a moment. Yes, family. Who doesn't have a family? The reason why we work so hard, other than hoping to leave our names in history, is nothing more than wanting to let our family live a better life. But sometimes, it's often difficult to achieve such a small request. Sometimes, we even call ourselves the disciples of the sage, saying that we have great power in our hands. Everything is just a joke. It's just that. Sir Yang, your life is very good. You have been chosen, so you still have a way out. Not only will you be fine, but your family will also be fine. Su Yozhen used his family as a starting point, and suddenly changed the topic to what she wanted to say today. When he heard Su Yozhen talking about his family, he could not help but think of his dream when he was young. Wasn't it to leave his name in history, and let his family live a better life? Just as he was thinking about Feifei's words, the tone of the conversation suddenly changed to the matter of someone taking a fancy to him. This caused his mind to slow down for a moment, and even his thoughts seemed to have stopped. He needed to slowly digest the content of the words. After what seemed like a breath, or a dozen breaths, Yangshan suddenly raised his head. Sir Su, what did you say just now? I said that someone has chosen you, and he will give you a way out, and you may even have a bright future in the future. However, right now you need to bear some things, and I don't know if you are willing to do so. Su Yozhen's eyes were fixed on Yangshan, waiting for his answer. Give me a way to live. What do I need to do? Yangshan still didn't quite understand, but he roughly knew that other than death, there was still a path to choose from. That was enough. What you need to do is very simple, you just need to. As the saying goes, the walls have ears. Even though there were only the two of them left in the room, Su Yozhen still used the method of whispering when she talked about what was going to happen next. This showed how important this matter was. Yangshan pricked up his ears to listen, but after a while his expression changed greatly, and he became agitated. It was unknown whether this agitation was due to anger or happiness, but in short, his face was a little red. Sir Yang, don't be too agitated. You still have time, but not much time. How about this? The letter written by your wife should be arriving soon. When the time comes, you can make your own decision. For now, you should have a good rest. Forgive me for being blunt, but no matter what a person wants to do, whether it is good or bad, they must first have a good body, ha ha ha. Su Yozhen left, leaving Yangshan alone in the chair, somewhat absent-minded. At this moment his mind was filled with many thoughts, many. Hu Xiao had already left long ago. He had probably guessed what was going to happen, and it was not suitable for him to stay in this place. After leaving the relay station, Hu Xiao had become a lot more taciturn. He had already sensed something, but it was not clear. As such, before he made a final decision, he still needed to take a good look and listen. Jianing Prefecture. He had been gone for 2 years, and when Yang Chendong returned, he had already changed his identity and became the Duke of Loyalty of the Great Ming Dynasty. It was said that both the North Arch, Zhu Qiyu, and the South Arch, Zhu Qizhen, thought highly of him and had a deep friendship with him. Chapter 350. When such an important person returned to Jianing, it would definitely be a sensational event. Outside Jianing Prefecture, Magistrate Li Daotong was waiting in line with a group of officials. Yang Chendong's impression of Li Daotong was not bad. It was precisely because of this that he gave him face and personally got off the carriage. After exchanging greetings for a while, Yang Chendong used the excuse of being tired from the journey to politely decline the other party's offer to give him a welcome dinner. The group of horses went straight into the Yang residence. The Yang residence became lively because of Yang Chendong's arrival. The old housekeeper Yang Hai was busy in front and behind the house. This would be the place for him to retire. Taking advantage of the fact that the fourth young master and the sixth young master were both here, there were many things that he needed to buy. After the fourth young master, Yang Chendong, arrived at Jianing Prefecture, he first worshipped the ancestral temple with his sixth brother. Then, out of boredom, he wandered around the various restaurants and even the brothels. With the title of the Duke of Loyalty, it was much more convenient for him to do anything. In contrast, after Ban Chendong arrived at the Yang residence, he quieted down and rarely went out on the streets. However, this didn't mean that he was completely unaware of what was happening outside. On the contrary, many things were under his control. For example, the report from the Security Bureau on his desk clearly recorded what had just happened in the capital. As the representative of Emperor Ingzong, Yang Shan came to Baiming's capital. However, to everyone's surprise, he didn't have the slightest intention of criticizing the acting Emperor Zhu Qiyu. On the contrary, he said that he came to express friendship and acknowledge the legitimacy of the acting Emperor of Baiming. When this matter came out, naturally, the entire court was shocked. The acting Emperor Zhu Qiyu was overjoyed and personally invited Yang Shan to a banquet to express his goodwill. At the banquet, Yang Shan even took out a document with his seal as the representative of Ingzong. When he solemnly handed over the letter of credence, he said that no matter if it was Southern Ming or Baiming, they were all one family. Now that the southern part of the Southern Ming Empire was in chaos, they still needed the help of their brothers. Thus, they took the opportunity to ask for the help of the Duke of Loyalty, Yang Chendong. After receiving Nanming's approval, Zhu Qiyu was overjoyed. The other party had only made a small request, so how could he refuse? As such, the matter of Yang Chendong working for the Southern Ming Empire was set in stone. After doing all this, Yang Shan used the excuse that Emperor Ingzong was waiting for news as an excuse to leave. After a night's rest, they left the city early the next morning. No one knew where Yang Chendong had gone. Only the patrolling soldiers saw traces of a group of carriages being robbed. They also found a document with the seal of the acting emperor, Zhu Qiyu. The document stated that Yang Chendong could contribute to the Southern Ming Empire. How could Yang Shan disappear? All of this was naturally Yang Chendong's handiwork. Not only did Yang Shan disappear, even his family members in the Southern Ming Empire's capital had disappeared. In Ingzong, Zhu Qizhen received news that Yang Shan had actually represented him in acknowledging the legitimacy of Baiming's existence. He was so angry that he flipped over the dragon table. Soon after, the embroidered uniform guards left the palace and came to the Yang residence to capture the criminals. Unfortunately, there were indeed people in the Yang residence. However, they were only actors who had come to put on a show a few days ago. They were all tied up in the courtyard and hadn't eaten for 3 days. At this moment, the embroidered uniform guards found out that the Yang family members had already escaped. The embroidered uniform guards who were in charge of leading the team reported this matter to Commander Mengda Mengda, who knew Ingzong's fate, was afraid that he would be implicated. Thus, he killed all the actors and lied to the higher-ups that Yang Shan's family members had resisted arrest and were all killed. That was how things had happened. The main person who had put in the effort was Su Yozhen. He had done everything step by step after receiving Yang Chendong's secret letter. For example, he had taken the lead in persuading Yang Shan. Since Yang Shan was disheartened and Su Yozhen could guarantee the safety of his family members, he simply threw caution to the wind and followed the plan to represent Ingzong to acknowledge the existence of Nanming. Thus, he was able to leave with his life intact. At this moment, he was being arranged by the Security Bureau to meet up with his family in Qiqian City. Yang Shan was a capable person. However, because he had a bottom line in his heart, he wasn't willing to wallow in the mire with some people. This kind of capable minister was what Yang Xie needed. This time Lu De wanted to push him aside. However, he had forcefully delivered this person into his hands. He didn't know how angry and pained Lu De would be after knowing the truth. Putting this information to the side, Yang Chendong slowly leaned back on the wooden chair. It had been more than 20 days since he last saw Kuang Yi in Hangzhou residence. Counting the days, he should be here soon. However, he didn't know what kind of status he would be given this time. Just as Yang Qindong thought, Kuang Yi had already arrived outside Jianing residence that night. After a good night's rest, he brought a group of followers into the city early the next morning. Magistrate Li Daotong, who had received the news first, brought his men and stood there respectfully. At the same time, he was shocked by what had just happened. He had received the news last night that Kuang Yi, the Minister of War, was going to enter Jianing residence to discuss important matters with the Duke of Loyalty. Therefore, he had sent someone to the Yang residence the next morning to invite Yang Qindong to personally go out of the city with him to welcome Minister Kuang. The people were sent out, but they quickly rushed back and brought back news that shocked the prefectural magistrate. It was Yang Qindong who said that he would be waiting in the Yang residence. Heavens, this was a minister. After the imperial court removed the cabinet, he was the most powerful group of people. However, the Duke of Loyalty still didn't seem to take him seriously. What on earth was he relying on? Li Daotong cautiously and nervously saw Kuang Yi, the Minister of War, who had rushed over, looking travel-worn. "Where is the Duke of Loyalty?" Kuang Yi asked when he saw the people who had come to welcome him. His eyes were filled with anxiety. Li Daotong's heart was beating like a drum when he heard this. Look, she's blaming me now. He had wanted to make up a random lie, such as that the Duke of Loyalty was on his way. However, he didn't have the courage to lie in the face of the old and mighty Minister of War. He immediately told the truth. Minister Kuang, the Duke of Loyalty said that he was waiting in the Yang residence. After saying these words, Li Daotong felt as if all the strength in his body had been drained at this moment. Then, he was ready to bear the wrath of thunder. However, Kuang Yi didn't seem angry at all after hearing the news. Instead, he said, "Since that's the case, you don't have to accompany me. Go do your own things. Guaning, let's go directly to the Yang residence." Kuang Yi wasn't angry. Li Daotong was shocked and understood the importance of the Duke of Loyalty. He hurriedly led the way towards the Yang family's old residence in the city. Although Yang Qindong didn't personally come out to welcome them, the Yang residents had already made arrangements. They had even sent his fourth brother, Yang, to personally welcome them 3 streets away. Kuang Yi's expression was much better after seeing this. It would be impossible to say that he didn't care that Yang Qindong didn't come out to greet him. However, considering that Yang Qindong was a duke and had saved his life, he didn't need to be too calculative about etiquette. Seeing Yang 3 streets away, Kuang Yi knew that Yang Qindong was in the ancestral hall of the Yang family's old residence. After entering the Yang family's residence, Kuang Yi dismissed everyone, leaving only Yang to lead the way. Upon entering the ancestral hall, he saw Yang Qindong, who had changed into a white robe, kneeling on a praying mat. Directly above him was a memorial tablet with Yang Rong's name written on it. When Kuang Yi saw the memorial tablet, he immediately cupped his fists and bowed 3 times. At this time, Yang Qindong had already turned around. "Minister Cheng has come to visit my father. If the underworld knows, it will be gratified. Young Master Yang is also someone this old master admires. Since we've met today, I must pay my respects," Kuang Yi said with a calm expression. "Speaking of which, Minister Cheng is the first minister to come here to pay respects to my father. All right, wait for me to tidy up. I will have to trouble Minister Cheng to wait in the front hall." Yang Qindong's lips curved into a smile. Yang Qindong turned around and left, leaving Kuang Yi standing there with a thoughtful expression on his face. He was the first minister to come here. Was he hinting at something? Yang Qindong was obviously hinting at something. Thinking of his father, Yang Rong, who was one of the 3 great families, how glorious he was when he was alive. But in the end, he died on the way home. After entering the Yang residence's ancestral hall, no one came to pay their respects. This was the way of the world. The tea cools down after the person is gone. This was not the cold-blooded scene Yang Qindong wanted to see. Since he had contributed to the country, he should be honored by the country at all times. Just like the Heroes Monument erected in Qiqian City, it was a way to commemorate those who had contributed to the country. In the future, he would also build a large cemetery. Not only the Yang family, but also those who had contributed greatly to the country could be buried there and enjoy the worship of their descendants. Of course, there was another reason why Yang Chendong chose to meet in the ancestral hall. He wanted to see Kuang Ye's attitude towards his father. If Kuang Ye only cupped his fists in a perfunctory manner, then it would be difficult to befriend someone who did not care about old ties. In that case, he would have to keep his bottom line when interacting with Kuang Ye in the future. From the looks of it, Kuang Ye's performance was not bad. Yang Chendong could not help but want to recruit him. Of course, this so-called intention to recruit was just a thought. Kuang Ye was already very old, and his thinking was somewhat old-fashioned. It would not be easy to convince him. Furthermore, he had served the great Ming Empire for his entire life. His heart might not be able to change in such a short time. Since that was the case, it was better to let him be a loyal minister. If there was a chance, he would make sure that Kuang Ye did not die. Chapter 351. Kuang Ye naturally could not think of so many things. He was also unable to detect the strong desire in Yang Chendong's heart. After hearing the words just now, he could only sigh at the hypocrisy of the world, and then went to the front hall. Today he was here on the emperor's orders to invite Yang Chendong to send troops. After all, the chaos in the south was getting bigger and bigger. If it was not stopped, it could affect the political situation of the southern Ming dynasty. Yang Chendong, who had just changed into a green robe in the front hall, also walked in. Haha, I'm sorry to have kept Minister Kuang waiting. Is there any good news from the emperor? Haha, the loyal duke's guess is right. The emperor spent a lot of effort to invite you. This time he even put in enough capital. He even acknowledged the legitimacy of the northern Ming dynasty. Only then did he get you, a great general, to come out. Don't let down the emperor's good intentions. Kuang Ye's face was smiling, but in fact his heart was bleeding. He had seen Zhu Qizhen's appearance when he was angry. It was true that when a dragon was angry, corpses could be strewn across 1,000 miles. Fortunately, paying such a huge price did not mean that there was no reward. Yang Chendong was able to lead troops and received the emperor's approval. This could be considered as an explanation. This time, Yang Shan's actions had made Ing Zong very angry. If he could catch him, he would probably kill all 9 generations of his family. However, the matter had already been done. Now he could only hope that Yang Chendong could do his best to recover some of the losses. Yang Chendong naturally pretended to be flattered. He smiled and said with a serious face, "Receiving the emperor's kindness, Chendong will naturally be willing to sacrifice my life to repay the emperor's kindness. It's just that the request made by our country's mercenaries, I wonder if your majesty will." He will. Seeing that Yang Chendong didn't intend to go back on his word, Kuang Ye hurriedly said, "The emperor empathizes with the mercenaries' efforts, so this time he is especially generous. He allows you to obtain what you need by attacking your opponents in the process of suppressing the bandits. However, please do a tally of what you have obtained and report it to me." Not only that, His Majesty also specially appointed Duke Zhongdan as His Majesty's imperial envoy, so he could take advantage of His Majesty's actions. In addition, there are 5,600 soldiers in the Guangdong Guard Institute near Guangdong, 2,600 soldiers in the Guangzhou Prefecture, 1,000 soldiers in the Shaozhou Prefecture, and 1,000 soldiers in the Pingel Prefecture. In total, there are more than 10,000 soldiers who can be deployed by the imperial envoy. The nearby Great Ming Prefecture will also arrange for the army's provisions. Kuang Ye seemed to be worried that Yang Chendong would go back on his word. He hurriedly took out his trump cards one by one. It seemed like he was being honest, but if one listened carefully, it seemed like there was nothing practical other than 10,000 soldiers. It was just like the problem of rations. Since they were fighting for the southern Ming Empire, why would they need to prepare their own rations? As the saying goes, an emperor doesn't lack hungry soldiers. There was also the position of imperial envoy, which was a temporary position. When you were used, you would naturally have a lot of power, but what if you were no longer needed? You would immediately be beaten back to your original state. In this aspect, Ingzong's actions were far inferior to Daizong's. At the very least, Daizong had given him the position of Duke Zhongdan. Kuang Yi said it in a dignified manner, but in reality he didn't have to pay much. He even had to rely on himself to rob the bandits for military expenses. If it were any other general, they would definitely shake their heads at such conditions. However, Yang Chendong had already considered everything and even planned it out. Most importantly, he needed resources and people, and he also needed a higher reputation. This could be said to be taking what each of them needed. Since that was the case, how could he refuse? Even if he didn't have these things, he would still take action. All right. Seeing that Kuang Yi had finished speaking and his mouth was dry, Yang Chendong laughed and slapped the table, saying, "This matter is decided. Thank you, Minister Chung, for your mediation. Since I am a loyal and courageous count, I will naturally do my best to help the emperor resolve his worries to the greatest extent." Yang Chendong's promise made Kuang Yi excited. Good, with the Duke Zhongdan's help, there is naturally nothing to worry about. However, how many soldiers will the mercenaries send? Kuang Yi smiled like an old fox. His smile seemed calm, but in reality his eyes were like swords. This was probably the problem he was most concerned about. Haha. Yang Chendong didn't immediately reply. Instead, he grinned and picked up the hot tea on the table, asking, "Minister Chung, you must be very familiar with the situation of the mercenaries. Just like in the Battle of Tumu, I only had 100 people with me, but I still saved everyone from the battlefield. Also, when the Walla approached Baiming's capital, does Minister know how many soldiers they sent?" Kuang Yi lowered his head and began to think. "I heard that there weren't many soldiers." "That's right, there weren't many. In the end, there were only 400 people. Yang Chendong raised 4 fingers and said proudly, "With only 400 people, I dared to tell the hundreds of thousands of Walla's elites not to attack Baiming and to turn north." Then how many mercenaries do you think are needed to deal with a group of bandits without any support? This seemed to be a rhetorical question, but it showed Yang Chendong's confidence. At this moment he had a smile on his face, the corners of his mouth slightly raised, showing an expression of a strategist. "Oh, only 400? When Kuang Yi heard this, he was already shocked. Although the Southern Ming Empire naturally had a certain number of intelligence agents in Baiming, and the information they sent back said that there were only 400 mercenaries, this information wasn't accepted by everyone. Based on their understanding, they believed that it was impossible to turn the situation around with just 400 mercenaries. This should just be a smokescreen by the Northern Ming Empire. The reason why the number of mercenaries was so small was just to highlight the strength of the Northern Ming Empire's army. But now that these words came from Yang Chendong's mouth, the meaning was completely different. There was no need for him to lie, at least at this time. Otherwise, the moment he was exposed, he wouldn't be able to get out of this embarrassing situation. It was no wonder that Kuang Yi was so shocked. "Of course it's true." Yang Chendong nodded seriously and said as if he was reminiscing. Back then, in order to hire these 400 mercenaries, Daizong paid a total of 10 million taels of silver. Thinking about it makes one's heart ache. Fortunately, the war was won in the end and the country stabilized. Everything was worth it. When he mentioned the price of 10 million taels of silver, Kuang Ye's eyes suddenly blinked, clearly shocked. When he saw Yang Chendong staring at him, he quickly revealed a bitter smile. "Duke Zhongdan, Ingzong just established himself in Nanjing, and the treasury is empty. We really don't have that much money to give you. This duke knows." Yang Chendong raised his right hand and stopped Kuang Ye's words. "It is precisely because this duke knows this that I didn't ask for an exorbitant price. To be honest, as a citizen of the Great Ming Dynasty, this duke's everything was given to me by the emperor. Now that I need an official, of course I have to step forward. Not only that, this duke has also discussed with the leader of the mercenaries. In order to completely solve the problem of the bandits in the south, the mercenaries are willing to send 3,000 soldiers. This is definitely a big deal." 3,000? Good. Kuang Yi was originally listening very seriously, but the moment he heard the number 3,000, he instantly became excited. Of course, this was also because Yang Chendong had done a good job in setting the stage. Think about it, to chase away Walla's army of more than 100,000, they only used 400 people. Although Baiming's army also contributed, without those 400 people, Baiming's old soldiers wouldn't have been able to achieve victory. In comparison, the 3,000 mercenaries this time was 7 times more than the previous time. Thus, how could Kuang Yi not be excited? No wonder he said the word good twice. With this foundation, the rest of the conversation became much easier. During this time, Kuang Yi also took out the imperial sword that Ing Zongjiang had given him. He said that as an imperial envoy, he had the power to make decisions on the spot. If any of the southern Ming officials were disobedient, he could use this sword to kill them and not be punished. He also said that Guaning had admired the Duke of Zhongdan for a long time, and greatly respected the war god. Could he use this opportunity to learn from him? Of course, with this person here, it would be easier to mobilize the nearby Ming soldiers. Yang Chendong rubbed the long sword in his hand. He had seen many imperial swords appear in movies in the future. Every time this item was taken out, it seemed to flash with a golden light. Now he could finally hold it in his hand. Of course, the moment he held it in his hand, he realized that the sword was very ordinary. It was just a bit more flashy than a normal sword. In the end, it was just a symbol. After hearing that Guaning was going to follow him, Yang Chendong's first thought was that Kuang Yi was monitoring him. But when he thought about it, this was normal. After all, if there were no people from the military by his side, it was inevitable that he would run into trouble. Furthermore, even if he refused Guaning, there would probably be other people who would appear by his side for various reasons. Since this was the case, it was better to agree early and get it over with. At least he could let Kuang Yi owe him a favor. Guaning is Minister Cheng's favorite general. He should be someone with some ability. Since this is the case, he can just follow. However, I ask Minister Cheng to tell him that as long as he follows me, he only needs to listen to my orders. I don't need him to give any opinions. Haha, speaking of which, even if he gives an opinion, I may not listen. This point needs to be made clear first. Otherwise, if you lose the battle, don't blame it on me. Chapter 352. Yang Chendong's agreement allowed Kuang Ye's heart to relax. He was very clear in his heart that even if Yang Chendong rejected him now, there was nothing he could do. After all, it was Ing Zong's idea to ask him to send troops. In order to achieve this goal, the Southern Ming Empire had paid a great price. If there was a problem because of one person, he would be guilty. As such, when Yang Chendong said that he would not allow Guaning to interfere with his military decisions, there was no reason for him to refuse. Duke of Loyalty, please rest assured. Guaning will follow you to solve some problems and learn from you. He will definitely not interfere. With Kuang Ye's assurance, a satisfied expression appeared on Yang Chendong's face. That's good, that's good. Then, when will the Duke of Loyalty decide to dispatch troops? The chaos in Guangdong is getting bigger and bigger, and there are signs of attacking the Guangzhou prefecture. Zhu Huihua has the help of the Miao soldiers, and now that Jiaoji is sending troops, the Southern Ming Empire does not have the energy to send troops to suppress the bandits. When Kuang Yi spoke of the war, he could not help but become anxious. With war everywhere, it was hard for him to be the minister of war. There is no need to rush this. The leader of the mercenary army has been waiting for my reply. Now that I have Minister Kuang's reply, I can naturally reply to him. I believe that it will take at most half a month for their army to arrive. Yang Chendong chuckled, a playful look in his eyes. It was not that he was not anxious, but that Kuang Ye's news was too slow. He could only wait. This was the disadvantage of not having good communication. Yang Chendong's trip to Baiming's capital and persuading the Daizong Emperor to allow Yang Chendong to lead the troops took more than 20 days. By the time it reached Yang Chendong's ears, it was already close to a month. If this was a modern battlefield, the dust would have settled in a month's time, and the outcome would have been unchangeable. Hearing that he still needed to send a message to the mercenaries, although Kuang Yi was anxious, he didn't show it on his face. Instead, he nodded as if he understood. Yes, the Duke of Loyalty is right. Since that's the case, please urge them more. After all, the situation at the front is urgent. That is natural. Since this duke has accepted the emperor's decree, I know what is more important and what is more important. Yang Chendong nodded as if he wanted Kuang Yi to be at ease. Kuang Yi finally left, leaving Guaning behind. From this moment on, this person was nominally Yang Chendong's subordinate. When Yang Chendong wanted to meet Guaning as a form of hospitality, he entered the courtyard where Guaning was supposed to be. However, he saw a different scene. A woman with an extremely graceful figure was sitting in the stone pavilion, looking at the pond in front of her as if she was thinking about something. Just by looking at her back, Yang Chendong couldn't help but think of a poem. More than 13 years of marriage, budding at the beginning of February. 10 miles of spring breeze on the road of Yangzhou. Rolling up the beaded curtain is better than that. Yang Chendong also saw Hu Yan, Xiao Yin, Madame Shui, and Madame Xiang from the back. Although each of them had their own merits, especially Madame Shui's back was the most beautiful. However, compared to the woman in front of him, she seemed to be inferior. While he was in a daze, the sound of footsteps suddenly came from beside him. Then another woman's anxious voice with a hint of anger was heard. "Who are you? Why are you here?" The person's exclamation also startled the owner of the back figure to turn around. When she turned around, her clear and bright eyes, arched eyebrows, and long eyelashes trembled slightly. Her white and flawless skin had a touch of pink, and her thin lips were as delicate as rose petals. Her hair was clean, and her face was delicate and pretty. Her clear eyes and the fresh and natural aura emitted from her body formed a beautiful picture. The woman's face was completely revealed in front of Yang Chendong, and he felt like he was in a daze. At this moment, time seemed to have stopped. It was as if only the two of them existed in the world. "Cough. Who are you? Please respect yourself and leave." While Yang Chendong was in a daze, the woman's voice sounded. Her voice was as pleasant as the song of an oriole, and Yang Chendong couldn't help but feel a little intoxicated. After all, he was a man who had seen much of the world. The shock quickly disappeared, and he returned to normal. He cupped his fists and said politely, "I'm here to see Guaning, but I don't know where he went." Duke. Are you the Duke of Loyal and Daring?" That woman seemed to be very intelligent. Just from this one sentence, she had guessed something and guessed Yang Chendong's identity. "That's right." Yang Chendong nodded, and then looked at her curiously. "I'm Su Maner. Greetings, Duke of Loyal and Daring. That's my maid Xiao Yin. Lord Guaning has gone to send Lord Zhao off. I think he'll be back soon. If Duke of Loyal and Daring has any matters, you can just wait for a while." The woman bowed and replied softly, "Oh, you're Su Maner, a very nice name." Yang Chendong replied with a smile, and then waved his hand. "I'm just here to see how Minister Councillor Guan is staying. There's nothing important. Since he's not here, we'll talk about it later. I'm really sorry to disturb Mississippi. I'll take my leave now." After showing a sunny smile, Yang Chendong turned and left. Beta Persei, who was following beside him, almost bumped into him. Fortunately, he was trained and dodged instinctively. However, no matter how one looked at it, this action was a little awkward and funny. As if she had noticed this scene, the servant girl named Xiao Yin chuckled behind her. Yang Chendong happened to walk out of the courtyard at this moment. When he heard the laughter, he couldn't help but glare fiercely at Beta Persei, who was following beside him. At this moment, Yang Heir's head was lowered, and he had a submissive expression on his face. "All right, go and investigate the background of this Su Maner and report it to me." "Young master, shouldn't she be Guanying's wife?" Beta Persei was stunned and looked as if he had guessed her identity. "You're really becoming a pig if I say you're stupid. Didn't you hear what she called Guaning? Also, there's going to be a war soon. As a young general favored by Kuang Yi, how could Guaning bring his family here?" He shook his head in disappointment. Beta Persei was good at everything. He was skilled and loyal, but sometimes his brain was short-circuited. After following him for so long, he still hadn't learned his lesson. Sometimes, Yang Chendong couldn't help but be led astray. He was really a pig teammate. "Oh." After receiving Yang Chendong's reminder and reprimand, Beta Persei nodded, then patted his chest and said, "Young master, don't worry. This matter will be handed over to Beta Persei. I'll definitely find out her identity very soon." "Go." Yang Chendong nodded, then hummed a tune as he walked towards his own backyard. After finishing his discussion with Kuang Yi, Yang Chendong returned to his garden study and began to draft a secret order, preparing to mobilize Lungfeng inland. Yang Chendong had already expected this to happen. Naturally, Suxian City had already received the order and began to gather the army. Just as he promised Kuang Yi, Lungfeng did indeed send 3,000 soldiers. To be specific, it was 2 regiments of Lungfeng. After a few years of development, the small number of soldiers was still one of Yangxia's drawbacks. But even if they took the path of elite soldiers, there were some things that couldn't be rushed. Fortunately, the number of soldiers was still increasing. Today, the original 2 regiments had been upgraded to 2 divisions. The Army Division commander was Lung Song, while the Navy Division commander was Gao Xiong. Each division had 2 regiments under them. Each regiment had 3 battalions and 1 company, a total of 1,000 soldiers. If that was the case, Lung Feng's regular army had around 4,000 soldiers. This time, they said they would send 3,000 soldiers. Of course, they couldn't all be the most elite and regular Lungfeng. There was also an auxiliary division. Compared to the Lungfeng regiment, the auxiliary division had more soldiers. It had 5 battalions, each with 300 soldiers. In addition, there was a reinforced battalion, 4 companies, and 1 company, a total of 2,000 soldiers. The Lungfeng regiment was the 2nd regiment of the army, a total of 1,000 soldiers. Regiment Commander Luopu. Speaking of Luopu, he was also one of the first batch of Lungfeng members trained in the Yang clan's old mansion. The only difference was that his performance back then was mediocre. But in the past few years in Qiqian City, his individual performance was extremely outstanding. Especially a while ago, when they were ambushed by the first Shang dynasty on Little Ryukyu Island, Luopu, who was the battalion commander, was in charge of guarding the place. But now he didn't have enough men under him. He only had 200 soldiers under him. But even so, he still made a beautiful counterattack. He still used the powerful firepower in his hands to suppress the enemy and capture more than 500 enemy soldiers. He did not let the enemy break through the defensive line and endanger the safety of the Yang faction's territory. This battle was extremely beautiful. Even when they summed up the experience, Lung Song and Gao Xiong felt ashamed and reported this matter to Yang Chendong. Later on, when the regiment was changed to a division, Lung Feng became the division commander of the 1st Division and the regiment commander of the 1st Regiment. Luopu then became the regiment commander of the 2nd Regiment. This time Luopu was the leader. It was also Yang Chendong's request. He wanted to see if this person was truly talented. If he was, he wouldn't hesitate to promote him. Luopu was the regiment commander. Kong Jia, son of Tsuxian City's paper factory manager, Kong'an, was one of the 5 political instructors that Yang Chendong had his eyes on. Now he finally made a name for himself and became the political instructor of the 2nd Regiment. The 3 battalion commanders below him were Wu Sheng, Chen Bo, and Kong Chuanxin, as well as Ling Daqiang, the company commander directly under him. This was the upper echelon of the 2nd Regiment. Among them, there were people that Yang Chendong was familiar with. There were also people who had been selected to become members of the Lungfeng Regiment. He wanted to use this opportunity to meet all of them. Chapter 353. The regiment commander was called Lu Zhua, and the political commissar was Songjia. They were people who joined Lungfeng later on, and it was said that they were all really capable. This time, they led 2,000 men to participate in the war, which was also a form of training. The so-called men were people who were prepared to take part in the test of Lungfeng. In terms of overall strength, they were naturally not as strong as Lungfeng who had passed the test. However, in terms of overall strength, they were not something a normal army could compare to. Even within these men, there were many hidden dragons and crouching tigers. Maybe in a short while, they would pass the test and become official members of Lungfeng. They sent out 3,000 men all of a sudden, which was close to half of the troops in Qiqian city. This was also the result of Yang Qindong's careful consideration. In the eyes of others, his mission seemed to be to deal with the chaos in Guangdong. However, only he knew that since he had already made a move, the bigger the better. If he did not obtain enough benefits, how could he stop? This was not his style. Speaking of the chaos in Guangdong, Yang Qindong picked up a piece of information from the desk. This was a detailed record of the situation in that area. The chaos in Guangdong referred to the peasant uprising that happened in Guangdong. Huang Xiaoyang, from Guangdong Nanhai, was imprisoned for a case. He led hundreds of prisoners to break out of prison and start an uprising. In the 14th year of Zhengtong, 1449, he led 100,000 men and 1,000 ships to attack Guangzhou. He was known as Shunmin Heavenly King and changed his name to Dongyang. He gave his subordinates the titles of Duke, Marquis, Count, Grand Tutor, Admiral, Commander, etc. The uprising army attacked Guangzhou for 8 months. In the 3rd month of the following year, 1450, Imperial censor Yang Xinmin took charge and forced the uprising army to slow down their attacks. In the 5th month, Admiral Dong Xing used the chance to move troops from Jiangxi and Guang to suppress. He used the wolf troops, Guangxi Dong soldiers, to enter Dazhou, killing and drowning 10,000 of them. Huang Xiao was raised by a stray arrow and sacrificed himself. The imperial army presented his head as a sacrifice and captured his father and eldest son. The remaining troops retreated to Daoyang Castle, using the terrain to fight the army. After they lost, they continued to fight along the ocean. In history, the Great Ming Dynasty was still united, and it was not split into the north and south. The chaos in Guangdong was slowly suppressed by the Great Ming Dynasty. But in this life, because of Yang Qindong's unexpected intervention, Zhu Qizhen did not become a captive, nor did he become the retired emperor. He was imprisoned in the Nangong Palace, and instead came to Nanjing to establish the Southern Ming Dynasty. This change further weakened the military strength of the Southern Ming Empire. With the rebellion of the king of Minzhuang, Zhu Huixin, and the unexpected invasion of the Jiaoji army, the situation in the southern land became very difficult. In order to solve this problem, Ingsek's Zhu Qizhen ordered the various prefectures' armies to suppress them. With no more pressure on his head, Huang Xiaoyang's second son, Huang Yuliang, took the opportunity to lead the 4 heavenly kings, Geng Jun, Sun Jianglong, Cui Hua, and Ru Honghai, and began to clean up the old subordinates and bewitch the people. In a short period of time, the troops grew larger and larger. They actually successively conquered Laizhou, Gaozhou, Xuanzhou, and Wuzhou. Now they were attacking Zhaoqing Prefecture, which greatly threatened the safety of Guangdong's capital, Guangzhou Prefecture. During this period of time, the Southern Ming Empire also sent out troops to encircle and suppress them. The most typical example was the Guanghai Guards that protected Guangdong. Although this seemingly powerful Guanghai Guard had 5,600 soldiers, Huang Yuliang's men had infiltrated them before the battle, and he had spent a large sum of money to bribe some of the high-ranking officials. As a result, at the start of the battle, their battle plans were frequently leaked, and they were ultimately defeated and scattered by the combined efforts of both inside and outside. The defeat of the Guanghai Guards fueled Huang Yuliang's ambition, and there were no stronger Ming Empire troops around to fight against him. They could only rely on the Qianhu Guards in the nearby prefectures to barely hold on. However, after the battle, they would be heavily surrounded, and in the end, they would be defeated. After all these, the situation in Guangdong became even more dangerous. Once the Guangzhou Prefecture was taken down, it would announce the fall of the entire Guangdong, which would eventually affect the nearby cities. Once he continued to move southwest, he would probably join forces with Zhu Huihua. If that was the case, they would cooperate with each other, and the Southern Ming army would be caught in a pincer attack. If that was the case, the Southern Ming Empire would be in danger. In order to quickly resolve the Southern Ming Empire's crisis, Ingzong listened to Empress Qian and asked Yang Qindong to come out. He wanted to quickly resolve the matter in Guangdong, so that the Southern Ming Empire could focus on dealing with Zhu Huixin, suppress the rebellion, and accumulate national strength. Looking at the information that stated that Huang Yuliang had over 200,000 soldiers, Yang Chendong threw the information onto the table. What 200,000? That was including the civilians that he had threatened. In reality, the army that he could use should be no more than 20,000 people. Moreover, most of them were people who could only fight battles that went smoothly. Once they encountered a strong army, they would probably kneel down and surrender after a single exchange. Yang Chendong naturally wouldn't put such an opponent in his eyes. All he was thinking about was how to gain more benefits from it. The South had been rich since ancient times. Although Guangdong had forbidden the sea, it had not been that long, and there were still many rich people. Among them, there was no lack of families that were as rich as a country. They usually had many connections that could ensure the safety of their family business, and the imperial court could not do anything to them. However, in the eyes of the rebels, these families were the best. They did not care about your identity or what kind of connections you had. They only knew that you were someone who would rob if you had money. Taking advantage of these chaotic times to steal their wealth was the best opportunity. Yang Chendong had his eyes on them, so how could he let them go? Thinking that once he obtained the wealth of these families in Guangdong, he would be able to further develop Qiqian City. Yang Chendong's face revealed a brilliant smile. Just as he was in a good mood, Beta Persei's thunderous voice came from outside the study. "Young master, Guaning requests to see you." "Oh, let him wait in the side hall." Yang Chendong put away the smile on his face. As if performing a magic trick, his face became much more normal. Only then did he walk out of the study unhurriedly, heading towards the side hall. In the side hall, Guaning did not wear his official robes, but changed into a military general's armor, looking majestic. When he saw Yang Chendong, who was dressed in green, step in, he immediately lowered his head and cupped his fists in greeting. Guaning greets the imperial envoy. The so-called imperial envoy was not necessarily a high-ranking official. It was just a special title appointed by the emperor when he went to a place to do things. When he was an imperial envoy, he did have the power to do things as he pleased, and for this he looked quite powerful. Even the political envoy, equivalent to the current position of provincial governor, of the various regions had to listen to his orders. However, once he returned to the court and was removed from this position, he would be reinstated. His power would be greatly reduced, and he would become ordinary and normal again. There were even some imperial envoys who, because they had too much power and offended too many people, would be impeached by the other officials once they were removed from their power. In the end, it was normal for them to not have a good ending. Thus, from a certain perspective, the imperial envoy's job was not easy. Guan Ying's respectful greeting was also for the position of imperial envoy. It did not seem like he respected Yang Chendong very much. Of course, Yang Chendong was aware of this. However, compared to other people, Yang Chendong did not care about the southern Ming court at all. Thus, even if he were to one day be removed from his position as imperial envoy, it would not affect him much. All he wanted was superficial respect and temporary respect, and that was enough. Thus, facing Guan Ying's greeting, he nodded lightly. "Can I call you General Guan in the future?" "In that case, I like this title very much." Guaning raised his head after hearing this and revealed a kind smile. "Good General Guan. Since it is like this, we will be working together for a period of time in the future. I hope you will not be stingy with your guidance." Yang Chendong also nodded with satisfaction. He liked officials who were practical. On the other hand, those who opened their mouths and spoke of the emperor's boundless kindness and the righteousness of the world were mostly armchair strategists. He did not believe that such people were very capable. Yang Chendong's politeness fell into Guan Ying's ears. He immediately replied politely, "Imperial envoy is joking. However, if there is anything you need my cooperation with, just tell me." "Good. Since it is like this, I will have to trouble General Guan to organize the specific situation of Guangdong and the information of the local officials and send it to me. I need to understand them further so that I can make judgments." Yang Chendong immediately said without any trace of politeness. Although the Security Bureau had its own intelligence system, under his orders, they had long begun to pay attention to the development of the situation in Guangdong. Furthermore, There were already people who had infiltrated the chaotic army. However, since it was intelligence, of course, the more the better. They could also make comparisons at crucial times. Guanning had long prepared for Yang Qindong's request. This was also the order of Kuangye minister before he left. It was that he could report to Yang Qindong in detail if there was anything related to Guangdong. Since Yingzong had chosen Yang Qindong as the main general, then naturally, everything had to be done in cooperation. Thinking of this, Guanning once again cupped his hands and replied, "Please be at ease, Imperial Envoy. I will go back and organize the information, and try to send the things you want as soon as possible. And then you can go." Yang Qindong nodded, and began to send him off. However, Guanning didn't intend to leave immediately. Instead, he lowered his head and pondered for a while before saying, "Duke of Loyalty and Courage, there is a woman in my courtyard who admires Duke's talent very much. Please let me report to her." "Girl." When Yang Qindong said this, the beautiful girl he saw in the courtyard appeared in his mind. He immediately nodded lightly. "All right, I like to give pointers to the younger generation. Let her come over when she has time." Chapter 354. Thank you, Duke of Loyalty and Courage. Guanning did not address him as an imperial envoy, but as a duke, indicating that this was a private matter. Thinking that Yang Qindong would understand the meaning, since the matter was done, he cupped his fist and left. Just as Guanning left, Beta Persei walked in with the deputy director of the Security Bureau, Yang San. "Young master, that woman's identity has been investigated. Let Yang San say it. She should be sent by Emperor Yingzong." Yang Qindong first nodded slightly to Yang San, then stared sharply at him. Being stared at by Yang Qindong, Yang San quickly cupped his fist and replied, "Young master's eyes are sharp. That woman indeed came on the emperor's order." "Oh." Hearing that he had guessed correctly, Yang Qindong couldn't help but laugh, then said, "It seems that after young master, I married 4 beautiful wives. I'm afraid that everyone in the world thinks that I'm a womanizer. It's also rare that the dignified Emperor Yingzong would cater to my liking. Forget it, forget it. Tell me her true identity." The young master actually knew everything. While Yang San was impressed, he also replied, "The woman's surname is Su, named Man, or also known as Su Wugu, referring to her soft and charming skills that few people can match, as if she doesn't have any bones in her body. This person is the #1 courtesan by the Qinhuai River, 18 years old, but has always been clean and honest, selling her skills and not her body. Because of her exceptional beauty and her proficiency in zither, chess, calligraphy, and painting, many nobles flocked to her. Even the current emperor of the southern Ming dynasty was tempted by her. However, due to the rumors, he didn't take any action. This time, it was Minister Kuangye who invited her here under the emperor's order. As for the reason, it still needs to be investigated in detail. To be able to get such detailed information in such a short time, it is enough to show the powerful ability of the Security Bureau. Yang Qindong was also very satisfied with this. "Well done. Since that's the case, send someone to investigate again. We must ensure that the information is detailed and accurate." Yang San, who was praised by Yang Qindong, was very excited. "Young master, please rest assured that the Security Bureau will immediately send people to investigate and clarify all the details. We can use Mao Mu's connections. Since it's related to women, he must know more about it since he works for Empress Qian." Yang Qindong pointed out. His intuition told him that if Suma Nair had only come because she admired him, he could understand. However, as the #1 courtesan on the banks of the Qinhuai River, she didn't have to take the risk. Whether or not there was a problem in this was worth pondering. If he didn't find out the reason, he wouldn't feel at ease letting her stay by his side. Yang Sen quickly left after receiving the order. Beta Persei, who had just left, quickly came in and said with a troubled expression, "Young master, Miss Su wants to see you." "I see. I'm busy with something important. Let third madam accompany her." Yang Qindong was looking down at something and didn't even raise his head as he spoke. In the backyard of the Yang family's old house, Third, Madame Shui went to see Su Maner after receiving Beta Persei's report. Not to mention that they were all courtesans, they had a lot in common. This Su Maner was quite capable. It didn't take long for her to attract bursts of laughter from Madame Shui. Such laughter alarmed first Madame Huyen. She learned the identity of the visitor from her personal maid, Xiaoqing. After thinking about it, she went to the study and saw Yang Qindong. Sixth brother. Huyen appeared. Seeing Yang Qindong sitting on a wooden chair with his eyes closed, she called him softly. Yinner, come here. Hearing the sound, Yang Qindong opened his eyes. When he saw Huyen standing outside the door, he smiled and raised his hands, as if asking for a hug. A trace of shyness flashed across Huyen's face. She walked into the study with a 3-inch golden lotus, and soon fell into Yang Qindong's arms. Even so, she still said shyly, Sixth brother, Beta Persei and Xiaoqing are outside. I'm afraid they will laugh at us. What are you laughing at? You're my wife and I'm your husband. It's natural for us to love each other as husband and wife. There's no need to care so much. Yang Qindong said indifferently. After picking up Huyen, he frowned slightly. Why have you lost weight again? Are you not satisfied with the food? Alas, the southern food is good, but it's too bland. No, it's very good. I like these bland foods. Huyen shook her head quickly. She was born in the Hu family. Since she was born, her grandfather, Wuxia, had been a high-ranking official. She grew up in luxury and had never been mistreated. But compared to after following Yang Qindong, she found that her previous life was somewhat shabby. Yang Qindong was not short of money, and the things he sold were all good. Once they were put on the market, they would be easily digested. It was not an exaggeration to say that the supply could not meet the demand. The price of such goods was naturally very high, and the profit was naturally great. Under such circumstances, the Yang family had always eaten the best and wore the best. As the first madam, Huyen was the first to eat good things. It was really much better than what she ate when she was a girl in the Hu residence. Huyen was very satisfied. When Yang Qindong complained that he was not satisfied with the food, she said those words. But since Yang Qindong said so, how could she easily change her mind because of the words of others? Well, Lulang didn't say that the southern food is bad. He was just afraid that you are not used to it after living in the north for a long time. How about this? We really have nothing to do in the afternoon. Why don't we barbecue by ourselves? In this way, we can add ingredients according to each person's appetite. Won't everyone be satisfied? Speaking of which, Yang Qindong had not barbecued with them for a long time. Huyen really missed it. Of course, the delicious food was a part of it, but more importantly, she would have the opportunity to work with Yang Qindong and improve their relationship. She immediately nodded in agreement. That's good. Then this concubine will have someone arrange it. By the way, do you want to call Miss Su together? No need. Yang Qindong said with a normal expression. This is just our family's activity. There's no need to disturb any outsiders. Okay. When Huyen answered, her expression was very natural, but her eyes were much brighter, as if she had put down something. Huyen left. When she left, her footsteps were obviously much lighter. Yang Qindong saw all of this. He knew that no woman was willing to share the man she liked with other women. No matter how magnanimous she was and how nice her words were, when it really happened, there would still be a trace of resistance and unwillingness in her heart. Thinking of this, although Su Maner was indeed unbelievably beautiful, Yang Qindong still lost some interest. When he had many women, he realized that the thought was the most important. As for women, how many was enough? How many was enough to satisfy one? Huyen left happily. Then, as the wife of the family head, she began to take care of the barbecue in the afternoon. As the number one cook Yang Qindong had used for many years, Ichioa was naturally the main force. This time, she had also returned to Jianing Mansion from the capital. At this moment, she began to prepare all kinds of ingredients and condiments. Not long after, fourth brother Yang Yang also rushed over after hearing the news. When he was in the capital, he had been lucky enough to participate in the barbecue once and found it very interesting. Now that he had another chance, how could he let it go? He immediately rolled up his arms and sleeves, indicating that he was going to do something. Since Master Yangxi was here, third Madame Shui naturally had to show up. After hearing the news from the maid Xiaowei, she found an excuse to ask Su Maner to leave. As soon as she entered the backyard, she saw Hu Yan, who was busy directing the crowd from afar. She called her sister and came over. As soon as Hu Yan saw Madame Shui, she blinked twice and asked as if there was a hidden meaning in her words, "Sister, you're here. By the way, where is Miss Su?" Madame Shui naturally knew that Hu Yan was testing her, so she answered with a smile. "I told her that I was tired, so she sensibly left. By the way, what did my husband mean?" As she spoke, she pointed in the direction of the study with her slender finger. "He didn't mean anything. It's just that when I asked if we should invite Miss Su to barbecue together, Lulang said that this was a family matter and there was no need to invite outsiders." When Hu Yan said the last sentence, she was already smiling like a beautiful woman. "Sister, you're amazing." Madame Shui secretly praised her sister after hearing this. The so-called amazing naturally referred to Hu Yan's testing. It was just a simple question, which would not reveal anything, but she did get the answer she wanted. At least, Miss Su would not have the opportunity to become their sister for the time being. While the two women were whispering here, Yangxi had been driven out of the kitchen by Yi Qiu'er and the others. Important place. The reason was naturally because not only could he not be of any help, he would only cause trouble. However, he did not care about this. Instead, he asked where sixth brother was and hurried over. Yang Chendong was about to go from the study to the inner courtyard when he saw his brother. He said with a smile, "Fourth brother, why are you so travel-worn? Did you fall in love with a good person or something else?" Good person naturally referred to beautiful women, and something else referred to interesting things. This time, Yang Chendong followed Yang Chendong back to the Yang family's old mansion. Nominally, he was returning to his hometown to pay respects to his ancestors, but in reality, he was going on a sightseeing tour. After leaving the shackles of the capital, he, who was originally a hedonistic young master, received the support of Yang Chendong and spent a lot of money to get many things he liked, including some beauties and rare objects. Regarding this, Yang Chendong didn't have the slightest intention to stop it. Since it was his own elder brother, why not spend some money to make him happy? Moreover, his fourth brother had always been on his side, which was rare. He should cherish and keep it. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.